Good morning, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about the 2023 forecast that's coming up and also all the astrological patterns that I see. Now, in the messaging that we've had coming up to today's event, I talked a little bit about how I see that there are some fundamental structures that we have depended on for so many years now and that it will be challenged in this year. And I know for many people, you might be thinking like, okay, does that mean that there's going to be an earthquake this year? Now, before we start looking at a forecast, I always think it's very important to just sort of like, get everyone clear that I think a not so smart way of looking at things is like to ask, when is the earthquake going to happen? And in fact, what I always feel is a much smarter way of looking at a forecast, because after all, you're listening to an astrologer, right? Is to look at what we thought of as a seismic indicator. So that means, what are some of the things that we're starting to notice coming up in places around the world that could potentially indicate what exactly is going to happen and which exactly of these structures are going to be challenged in these years that are coming up, both from today and from the years coming up. So some of the things, let's have a look at what's been happening in the past year or so, because forecast doesn't just happen from like out of nowhere. It's usually built up on things that have been happening for some time now. Now, last year, one of the big things that we saw was that this concept of leadership even was kind of being called into question. And I think it's a lot of this sense of, from the Earth era, we had a sense of the leaders being a lot more stable, more solid. And in last year, what we had seen, first of all, was that in the middle of the year, Boris Johnson had resigned, mainly due to pressure from the fact that he kind of didn't really follow his own COVID rules. And then after that, he was replaced by Liz Truss, who kind of lasted only about 6 weeks. And after that, she was gone too. And then very, very recently, we also had New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern also announcing her resignation. Now, the thing is, it's not a new thing that we've had, like leaders stepping down. Like even in the Earth era, that was something that we had seen. But that usually was like, to hear of leaders being ousted and like some chaos going on, it's usually something that we associate with the really small, not very stable sort of countries. But what we saw last year as a little bit of a seismic indicator here was that even for countries that are typically regarded to be quite stable, quite solid, in fact known to be world leaders rather than just country leaders, have started to show signs that you didn't quite really expect them to finish their term sometimes. And we also saw that much closer to home, we had in Malaysia that there had been an election that had delivered a hung parliament, that which kind of sort of stopped things in Malaysia for a short period of time while they figured out like who exactly was going to be prime minister and how they were going to organize themselves in this way. And we also saw that there is also a kind of like a new phenomenon that if you have an election and then if the results are very, very near, you have two candidates where it's like, 1% sort of difference. And things like that means that, does it make it kind of okay for the losing side to sort of like, go and storm the Bastille, storm the capital, make a lot of noise about how, I think we should have won the election. So there are some of these repeated patterns that just seem to show up, which, if you think about it, are not quite things that we used to see during the height of the Earth era. And also, again, much closer to home also is that we start to see like the leaders are also being taken to task sometimes. Like they are being criticized for some of the decisions that are being made. And in Singapore, that last year we also saw that there was some criticism for a decision that had been made about an investment into a company called FTX. So, and last year also, towards the end of the year, we also started to see that what I call the bright economic lights of the air era, because at the beginning of 2022 or 2020, when the pandemic started, there was a lot of hype about how perhaps the industries were shifting and that it was going to be the tech industries that was going to be shining bright. But even then, as early as 2 to 3 years ago, I had kind of warned a little bit about how it was very important for companies. We had to make a distinction between what exactly was an air era company and also air era companies that were kind of still doing Earth era things. And this is why some of the patterns that we had seen, which has been getting headlines, is that there were a lot of tech wipeouts. So this has actually gone up to over 100,000 jobs have been affected in the tech sector. And beyond just the jobs, it is also that the reality check for the tech industry is that last year, CNBC reported that the whole industry had lost up to 7.4 trillion just in 1 year. So it's not billion, guys. We're talking about trillions here. And it's sort of gotten to a point where it's quite scary in terms of the shifts that can happen in the market when things like these happen. Okay, and also we start to see that the big wigs, I think there was a very high expectation that China would rise in power as America seems to falter a little bit. But we also saw that due to some of the political decisions, the health crisis decisions that were being made by the Chinese government, that last year had been a very difficult year for China as well. So then the question that a lot of people have been asking ever since the pandemic started is that why is it that the world feels so different nowadays? And I want to give a very big hint here, especially if you're first time in my webinars, that I really don't think that it's all for COVID. So there's been a lot of this blame that goes into, oh, I think it's because COVID has gone and messed up the world. I really don't think so. Because, and those of you who have seen my webinars before will have seen this, but bear with me while I talk to the people who may be the first time in a MaySim webinar, that this concept of the earth to air era, so that is a very important date that occurred in the year 2020. That's just about a couple of years ago. On the 22nd of December, this date marked a very important time in human history. Now, what you're seeing here, I'll skip all the boring astrological details, but this is known as a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And this conjunction actually changes sign every approximately 200 years. So every 200 years, when it changes, it doesn't change sign, I apologize, it changes element. So what happens is that every time the element changes, you find that the world starts to shift its priorities away from one thing to the other. And that means that if you happen to be humans who are living at the time of a transition from one era to another, then we, whether you think you are lucky or you're unlucky, that we are all people who are going to be this millennial earth to air era people who will see that transition of the world. So what happened from 2020 onwards was can be best explained by this. So for a very, very long time, the Earth was in what we call the Earth era. And although on my diagram here, it starts at 1901, but actually this phenomenon started from about the early 1800s up to about 1820. So this was also coincided with the start of the Industrial Revolution. So that was when people don't really care about kings and queens anymore, because that was the previous era where you find that there were a lot of these wars and things like that that affected which king you swore your allegiance to. But once the Industrial Revolution began, people cared more about factories, about production, about sending your kids to school, make sure that they have a university education, join the best company that there is, go and climb a corporate ladder. So that had been our world for the longest time. Now, until in 1981, the phenomenon shifted because for the very first time, the conjunction occurred in the air element. And this was also the year that you started to see from that moment on, computers invaded our lives. So you'll find that when you go to a shop, the shopkeeper no longer writes your purchase on a piece of paper, he puts it into a cash register. And you also found that kids no longer wanted to climb trees, they all wanted Nintendos and they wanted to play with their PCs. So, and of course, then lots of things changed, right? You found that LGBTQ, for example, became a lot more talked about, when before that it was this super taboo subject, no one would ever talk about it. So what you saw was that the world started shifting into the air era in 1981. And I know a lot of people would say that it may say that the air era just started. Actually, it didn't. I have to be real clear. It actually started in 1981 already. But you see, what happened in between was that in the year 2000, that was the millennium year, then it went back into the Earth era. And that was then when we started to see that the stock market started to rise like crazy. And suddenly everyone cared about Facebook, not for its connective purpose, but rather how much the IPO was going to be on the stock market. So Facebook was only as important as how much money it was going to make, not really whether or not it was connecting the world, which was originally when it came out in the air era, people were a bit more excited about the connectivity. So then why is it that then that 22nd of December 2020 is so important? Is because from that moment on, it meant that the world went full swing into the air era and the Earth era is not coming back for the next 800 years at least. So why this is really, really important is because here we are, right? So now we are in the beginning of 2023. So really, really right full swing into the air era. So we know, if you ask me, we really shouldn't be talking about the transition from Earth to air anymore, because there is no transition. We are already in the air era, whether you like it or not. And this is why part of the things that we see happening in the world right now is that if some things in the world are kind of still being stuck in the Earth era, if the schools that you're attending, if the company that you're working for, if the friends that you hang out with and the discussions that you're having are still sort of harking back into a space where the Earth era used to be, and then it can feel very uncomfortable, because then that conversation no longer matches where the world is going. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of the events that are happening in the world are going against expectations, and that's why we start seeing some really strange phenomena that happens, which never used to happen in the Earth era. And before we really go like full swing, I have a lot to cover today, but it's also to admit that it is no longer enough just to forecast the 2023. This is not my first webinar, it is my 10th prediction webinar, and I have a bit of experience doing this now. And I've discovered that if we only just look at predictions, and if you only just pay attention to like what is going to happen, then the only result that comes out of it is a lot of fear. And people start going like, okay, so like, you know, it seems like there's a lot of this doom and gloom going on, right? It seems like nothing is going right. And also that a lot of people feel powerless. And so what if you know that Russia is invading Ukraine? So what if you know that certain countries, their currency is going down? And it's like, for most people, then it's like, okay, then we give up lah. Or what can we do? And that's not a very good way to use this, right? And which is why it's very important that we don't just stop at the forecast. So you all know that this event is different from my previous events because this is a 2-day event, and for a very good reason. So on day one, I apologize in advance that I would love to tell you that 2023 is going to be a smooth and wonderful year, but I can give you the punchline now that it is not. Okay, and that's why January has been quite peaceful so far. And the reason is because most of the stuff happens after March, right? And that's why I've decided to put my webinar at the end of January. So as we go into day 2 tomorrow, then the things that I'm going to be focusing on is this concept of preparedness. That means it is only a bad thing if you don't know what to do. Okay, and that means preparedness is important. And also, that means every time a new era comes up, look guys, we are not the first people to go through an era change. This has happened throughout human history. And because I'm an astrologer, I went and studied into the history of how things move. And that means I've also studied how the successful people move from one era to another. And that means all the more it's important to listen to this. Now, in previous webinars, I talked about how if you look at most charts and diagrams that you see in the financial industry, in economics, in technology, or whichever it is, you'll find that the timeline of those charts don't go back very far. You'll be lucky sometimes if they show you more than 20 years. And almost none of those studies and none of those examinations go more than 200 years. No way. And probably the only thing that lasts that long is probably astrological calculations. And that means I'm uniquely in a position to look at how humans change from one era to another. And I can tell you right now, none of our modern economists are actually able to do that. So that's why we want to look at what then are some of these opportunities that come up in the air era that perhaps it will be very hard for your financial advisor to tell you because it doesn't exist in their studies. Okay, and also that for each of us on a person-on-person basis, that what is there a new role that you are going to have to embody in the years to come? And that means you also need an action plan. And rather than asking, okay, crap, like what can we do? Then the other thing is to realize, oh my God, there's so much we need to do. And then it fits into an action plan. And then everybody understands that, okay, so it's just a transitionary period and there's stuff that we have to go and get action on. Okay. So then again, on day 2, then the big question is, what is your personal strategy and plan? And so what if you know what's going to happen? So what if you know whether this war is going to start or that war is going to end, right? So that means tomorrow you definitely want to make sure that you show up with your 2023 plan, because then you can now look at it from the lens of what are the events that we think are going to happen in 2023. Okay, so then today is day 1. and I'm going to be looking at 9 countries and regions to watch in 2023. So that's where what all this action is going to be. Now, I didn't just study these 9 countries, I studied up to 80 countries and all their transits. And that means this is why I have highlighted these 9 countries, because I think a lot of action is going to happen here. And I've also highlighted 5 very influential men who will have a major impact on 2023, whether they are successful or in some cases not so successful, and that is going to be impactful for regular people like you and me. Now, tomorrow is when we go more into the planning, and throughout this entire summit, I will be covering 4 very specific strategies that I think people are going to use. And so it depends on which strategy is in your 2023 plan, and perhaps you can sort of assess and think about which strategy actually makes the most sense in an era that is no longer the Earth era. Okay, and also the guidelines for refining your plan. I've no doubt that for a lot of people, once you've heard what we have to share here, that you probably are going to be making some tweaks, some changes to your plans. And I also will be covering in as specific detail as I can, what is probably best not to do. Okay, so that means, and these are the things that I am anticipating that a lot of people may have on their 2023 plan, and I'm basically suggesting that that's probably not a very good idea. Okay, so let's go into things. There's a lot to cover today. So what I'm going to start first with what's the most big astrological thing that's happening in 2023 is that the planet Pluto is going to change sign from Capricorn to Aquarius. Now, don't panic there if you don't know astrology. I will walk you through this, okay? So what actually happens here is on my timeline, let me show you what has happened in the past when Pluto has changed sign. Typically, it stays in a sign for about 20 years. So then we can look into the recent history and see what happens when the signs change. Now, it was in the sign of Sagittarius in between 1995 to 2008. Now, when it's in Sagittarius, these are some of the astrology keywords that it is associated with. So that means if you see that there's a emphasis on things like political ideology, things like religious beliefs, right and wrong. So then there's a judgment here on whether what you're doing is fundamentally correct or fundamentally wrong. Now, in 1995, a very important thing happened, and some of you may be old enough to remember this. I was in school when I remember boys all pretending to be Osama bin Laden, right? When the video came out. So 1996 was important because bin Laden actually issued a fatwa. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. It's called the Declaration of War against the Americans occupying the land of the 2 holy places. So what this essentially meant was that, well, it was, although he declared war against USA, but then we regarded it as he declared war against the world. And the thing was, after that, it created a sense of fear that went around people. And there was a lot of this wariness of certain religions and also a sense of judging whether this person did this and whether it was okay or not. And there was a lot of condemnation going on. So, of course, later on, this led to the big event then was 9/11. So then Osama bin Laden has been blamed for this particular incident that happened in 2001. Now, during this entire period, more things happened also because then Saddam Hussein became part of that story too. And if you think about how after that it justified a lot of the wars that went on, of course now on hindsight then people are saying that maybe the wars aren't so fair after all. But if you look at how during this entire period, it's the whole idea of the right and wrong. And I think it started to have a bit of that warfare thing. He was accused of having weapons of mass destruction at the time, but then who actually was destroying who in a mass way, it's something that you have to decide for yourself now. Now, of course, then the next thing that happened was that it moved into Capricorn. This one a bit more in the recent history, happened in 2008. And the keywords for Capricorn tend to be associated with things like mega corporations. That's kind of what happened too, right? And also the high net worth and things like wealth inequalities. Things like high finance, high lifestyle, high infrastructure. So things like that occurred. And then if you think about, okay, what actually changed in the year 2008 was that the financial crisis happened. So that was when a lot of people lost money, countries lost money. And in fact, the crash that came afterwards affected everybody for a long time. Now, in case you think that, okay, then this meant that we all abandoned the financial system, right? But that didn't actually happen because right after the financial crisis happened, then we started to see power rising with the high net worth and with companies that are mega corporations. So the obvious one is big tech. So if you look at this diagram, starting from about 2010, so that's just after the financial crisis, started to rise in a very, very major way. And beyond that, we also see that some of the big companies, in terms of the market value, this is not just a rise, this is an exponential rise. And it's like, wow, it just suddenly took over the entire world. All the value of the world is pretty much there, right? And we also start to see that in other industries, besides tech is the obvious one, but then we kind of tend to overlook things like the health industries, like the pharmaceuticals, and then all these industrials, real estate, things like that. But if you look at the percentages, just look at the percentages and look at the timeline that's here. So that means just about the 2008 to 2010 period of time, the kind of increase that we see here is, I think, exponential doesn't quite cover it. Okay, and this is why what I'm trying to show you here is that, before I forget, like also things like real estate prices started going up like crazily, not just in the UK, but in most countries. In Singapore also, we started to see property prices skyrocket. Of course, we had a previous skyrocketing in the earlier decades, but it was quite scary in the last 20 years as well. So the thing is, let's look at this pattern here. That means why this is very, very important is because in the year 2023, we are going to see another change. So what can we expect? So let's just have a look. What I've noticed as a pattern is that every time Pluto changes sign, the year it changes sign, be plus minus 1 year, is when this big crisis shows up. So in 1995, and of course the following year, 1996, was when Osama bin Laden showed up. And after that, there was this massive fear about like religion. So if you belong to a certain religion, at the time, during that period of time, travel became very difficult. People would look at you like you're some kind of terrorist, you know. And also, in the year 2008 and the plus minus 1 year, that was when the financial crisis happened. So that means following this, usually after the crisis, you start to see the world power would shift. So basically in the 1995 to 2008, that's why there's an obsession about weapons of mass destruction. And then from then on, that the whole nuclear power thing became like a real obsession, right? And then again, in the Capricorn era, that was when suddenly it was about having millions and millions and trillions of dollars became the ultimate obsession of just about everybody. Okay, and that means when we look at what's going to happen in Aquarius, you don't need to be an astrologer to really understand. Number one is that either in the year for 2023, plus minus 1 year, is when we should actually see some kind of crisis that is associated with Aquarian words, which I will show you in a moment. But it also means that right after that crisis, you should also see a rise in power and obsession about all these words that are Aquarius. Now, one more important thing is that you realize that once Pluto changes sign, then we a bit don't care about the previous sign already. So you see, after the financial crisis, and then everybody became so obsessed about making millions. Notice how no one cares about Osama bin Laden anymore. No one cares about Saddam Hussein. And what this means is that once we are full swing into Pluto in Aquarius, consider that maybe, I know it's unthinkable right now, but maybe no one will care about the big corporations anymore. No one will care about high luxury and finance. And the thing is, very few people believe me, but history has shown itself, okay? So what then are some of the keywords that give us a hint as to what some of these things are? The first is things like climate change. And we also have things like human rights. And this has already been building up, right, for the past few years. Technology is another. So if you think about what are the possible crises that could come up, like a climate change crisis is what? It could be like a natural disaster, or perhaps not so natural disaster, if you know what I mean. And in fact, this can also mean that people start to really sit up and go like, okay, you really got to take this thing quite seriously, because people are like dying or things are being destroyed. And also things like technology. Now, as the world starts to become very, very dependent on all sorts of technology, a crisis could simply mean an outage. So like it could be. Now, guys, I make very clear, I'm not making a prediction yet. I'm simply looking at the concept of it, and so that everyone understands what could be the scale of it. Because if you look at the Osama 9/11 thing, and then you look at the economic crisis, that's the kind of scale we're looking at. So it could be a technological crisis, it could be a rebellion. Because the sign of Aquarius is associated with what we call people power. And that means if some governments or some leaders around the world not doing a great job, and you'll find that the people may rise if they don't really like your face anymore. And also this idea of a collectivism. So you start to see people sort of gather into groups. And some of these groups may not like each other very much, or they may differ very widely, very polarized in their thinking. And this is where the collectivism and people start to collect themselves into groups could actually be one of the phenomena that we will see. And notice how once it moves in 2023, this thing is going to last for about 19 to 20 years until 2043. So this is not going to be a 2023 forecast. This is a 20-year forecast, right? So give it to you right from the start of the webinar. Now, this year, what we will see, now we zoom in a bit more into 2023. Now, when Pluto changes sign, it doesn't do it like one shot. Okay, so basically, astrologically, first it will go into Aquarius for a while until about June, March to June, and then it will go back into Capricorn for a bit until the January of next year. And then after that, it will finally move into the air sign, Aquarius, and it will last for 19 years. Now, why this is important is because usually it's at the turning points that you find that the tension becomes very strong. And in fact, by my calculations, and also by what I see happening in the whole world, is that most of the action is going to center around between September to about November of this year. So that means pretty much the last quarter. And one of the reasons is because it is like, if you look at this diagram, right, it is like the last gasp of the earth thing. So basically, you'll find that a lot of the earth power structures will try to hold on to the power. But then the thing is the astrology not in their favor. So then you'll find that the power shift will start to really move between September and November of this year. Okay, so now as we go along, my entire summit will be divided into 4 sort of like chapters in that sense. And each of these chapters are pretty much the different kind of strategies that the people, everybody in the world are trying to employ these strategies to sort of deal with the situation. And as I go along, you'll see at the bottom, I have this fire era to air era, and which means that I sort of categorize all these strategies in terms of how far into the air era they actually are. Okay, so we start with the most fire era one, which is the invincibility. So this idea that comes from the fire era where might is the strongest. Okay, so of course, invincibility is typically associated. Now, when this invincibility moved into the earth era, all we cared about is that we only care about who is the fastest man on earth, who is the richest man on earth, who is the strongest, who is the biggest, market capitalization. So of course, the idea, the whole point of this strategy is to be the unchallenged winner. I'm number one and I will dominate the market. So guys, this is not just in terms of military might. We see this in business as well. We see this in PSLE results as well. So the whole idea is I'm number one, then nobody will challenge me. This one, very old-fashioned concept. But you also see that as the world started moving, it's in all the small things like who has the tallest building in the world. And then they start building taller and taller. So basically now is like the Burj Khalifa, as of now, is the tallest building. And you see companies get bigger and bigger. Then we rank them, right? Basically want to see which company is bigger. At first it's Microsoft, then after that change to like Google, then change to Apple, whichever lah. Okay. And then after that, same thing happened with the world economy. United States has been number one for a long time. I'm not really sure that they're going to maintain that for a very long time too. And then we also start looking at the militaries. So United States dominated for a long time, but hey, look, some people are catching up. Okay, so that's invincibility, not a very reliable strategy. And you also start to see like in terms of firearms and like, you know, world love ranking things. We always want to know who's number one, right? And then, of course, when we look at invincibility, that brings my forecast to these 3 very important people. And I will start, of course, with the United States. Okay, so let's talk about USA first. What are some of the big things that we are going to look out for? Now, this thing that I am looking at right now, I have covered in multiple of my prediction webinars because it is so important. And it describes the erosion of the foundation of the USA. Now, this is super important because when we think of the Earth era, all the images of the Earth era are associated with the United States of America. So whether it's associated with like markets, capitalism, wealth, cars, property, doesn't matter. It's all USA images, Hollywood. And that means that as the USA starts to get eroded, basically all these concepts that we associate with the Earth era will be challenged, every single one of those things. And this actually started in a very, very major way from about May last year. And I've been talking about this since like multiple webinars before, and it turns out that I have been accurate. So the thing is, you see a rise of idealism and ideology, and it includes religious conservatism. So people on the ground, like USA used to be a land of the free, land of the like anything, free love and whatever, and now it's not. Basically, people have become very, very religious and conservative in the US. And also you start to see that it starts to blur the boundaries into law and administration. So now that's where shit gets real, right? And then we also start to see that they start to idealize this idea of roots, origins. Are you black or white? Are you of European descent? Are you Christian? Okay, so things like that start to become important. Are you gay or are you straight? So things like that are important now. So between May and August of last year, this was strong. And I was accurate because last year, there was a law that was being overturned called Roe v. Wade. And this meant that it changed the constitution in a way that allowed states to outlaw abortion. And as of this month, look at this map here, and you see that all the states colored red color have now banned abortion. So that means women can no longer abort. Doctors who do it are being sent to jail. And this is a big thing because then it's like it takes away a lot of freedom, and that is being challenged in the US right now. And the thing is, what's a bit more worrying is that this victory was for the people who are very conservative Christians. It's being marketed right now as a spiritual victory, and you will have to do your own research to verify what it is that I have just shared. Okay, and then the thing is, and if you start to notice that some of these can seem a little bit fanatic in that sense, is because it is. And in fact, what my calculations show that as until next year, May of next year, it will go up another level. So that means the US will become more and more in this way. So that means on a realistic level, for people like you and me, that means what can we expect is that a lot of these laws will change. Things that used to be associated with the American freedom are going to shift, because then they are going to start shifting laws into very conservative ways. So daily life and work can become very chaotic or unpredictable, just like they just suddenly out of nowhere just like ban abortion. So the thing is, what then is next? Okay, and you also see that it will be very influenced by the radical opposition, and who become very vocal and unrestrained, because in the past there were a lot of things that were not acceptable to be discussed openly, and now people don't care already, they will just openly say already. Okay, and also that because of this fervor that is going through the country, then they will favor what I would call a radical new leader, or that they also don't mind a radical status. So that means in the past, if you tried to suggest that they were radical, then people say, no, not really, we're quite moderate. But I tell you now, they say, yeah, we are radical. So there's those of you who know astrology, that is that the Uranus becomes very strong. They don't care really what you say about them. So this is going to be, it could potentially affect women's rights further, because a lot of the indicators here are affecting the moon, which in astrology can affect women. Things like their role as a mother versus not mother. And so this is what I put on the timeline here, that at least until February of next year, we'll start to see like this kind of downward slide. Like it's like American freedom starts to dissolve. And by about May of next year, the fanatism starts to rise. Okay, and this is again something that we've relied on for decades and decades. It will disappear. Okay, and then so the question is then, why should you care? Because then maybe you live in Asia and you're very far away from them, and then you may or may not be a Christian. Why should you care, right? And the thing is, the reality is because it starts to separate, it starts to unseparate church and state. So that means one of the pillars of the Earth era was the rise of this thing called the nation state. So if you look into human history, in the past, it used to be kingdoms everywhere. So it depends on like one guy decides what's going on. And in the Earth era, we start to see people signing treaties. And we agree with each other, okay, we draw a line, then here is your country, here is my country. And then we decided that, okay, all men equal, because democracy, right? Then it's like, doesn't matter you what race, what religion, then everyone can be in parliament, then we all vote like fairly. But you see, America is the poster child for this. And if America starts to blur the lines between religion and state, then this is something that you should really pay attention to. Okay, so then that's something that you may have taken for granted, which may not continue. Okay, so that what you also see is that in terms of the law and the way the Supreme Court is structured in the US, right now, it is a very conservative court. And quite a lot of these people, they've already banned abortion, and there are quite a few things that conservative people don't like. that is, if you think about it, is quite associated with human freedom, especially in the air era. So America, strangely enough, will be making a lot of laws that go against the freedom of the earth, of the air era. So you find that there's the religious fervor will continue rising in the US. And then, of course, for many of you, will be like, okay, so yeah, that one is the law religion thing, right? And it's like, does it affect money, right? Because I know a lot of people like quite earth era one, I care about money. Yeah. So then the question is, right now it is the dominant currency, and what then does this affect America here? So then you find that although I've been warning for a very long time about the erosion of the US, but then I've been told by some people, hey, May, you keep saying that the US is going to be weakened, but then the dollar gets like stronger and stronger. So the dollar is strong. However, there is a very big problem, because even that goes against the air era thing, because then it's good for the US, but it's bad for the world. So in terms of a public good sort of thing, it's actually making life very difficult for many, many countries right now. And that's why looking forward here is that there could be a threat to value. So if you look on the left-hand side, you can see that there's this red line that I've drawn in the number 2 house. And the second house can be dealing with a more direct meaning, like monetary value, but it can also be values. Okay, so it's the same, it occupies the same space in astrology. So this would have started happening since February of last year, and it will continue until November of this year. And it can refer to values, and this could be their money becomes dominating. So that means the American dollar may actually, instead of going down, can actually be strengthened to the point that it dominates other people, like cannot take it already. And also this can also include spiritual beliefs within the country that can become dominating, that crowds out other people. And then, so they become very aware of threats to the dollar. So basically, once a lot of people start to get a bit angry with them that the money is so strong, then America will do everything in its power to try to maintain their invincibility. And this is where it starts to affect the world. So this will become strong around August or September. That's when a lot of this judgment will start coming up, and people are going to be assessing the US dollar. And just about September to October is where this will make them a bit insecure, and then we have to maintain our strength. Okay, so going on, it's that later on, you'll find that the ideals will spread even further. So as I said, from May onwards, the idealistic beliefs will go on, and May to August, it's strong. Okay, so basically what you see is all this black color stuff. I will highlight it for you here, that if I were to put everything together, you'll see that very quickly, America's beliefs will start to sort of diverge away from what the rest of the world wants to do. And this is not good news, because then so much of our trade and a lot of the world organizations have their base in the USA. And when this thing starts to be challenged, then some of those organizations that we have been following and we have depended on for decades may start to see a crack in terms of whether people agree or don't agree on things. Okay, so that's something you can write down if you're listening to this. Okay, and why is it that I've drawn this blue line here? Because that is March of 2023. So as you can see, for America, they're very weird. Okay, I draw this here to show you that America a bit late. So that means later, as I show you other countries, by March, you see a lot of things happening with it. America a bit slow to the game. And things only start happening in May onwards as a reaction to what the rest of the world is doing. Okay, and this, why? Oh yes, and before I look at that, can you look at the right-hand side of this, when I showed you that people will become very fanatic from May onwards. And this is very important because they have an election in 2024. So as of now, Donald Trump has announced his intention to run. No one else very significant has so far announced it. But why I am pointing this out is because this is not the first time Pluto is entering Aquarius. So every like few hundred years, this thing happens. So the last time this happened from Capricorn to Aquarius was in the year 1777. That's like almost 300 years ago. And if you know your history, why this year is very, very important. And then again, the history will repeat itself. There must have been a crisis that year that changed the world, and it made the world sit up. But what happened then was because the US declared their independence. So the US was independent in 1776. And this is a big thing because prior to that, in that Earth era, I can tell you who was number one. It was Great Britain. So that is a colonial power, everyone in British power, the whole world. And for one country to decide that, well, we're going to govern ourselves, It's like, huh, you mean can like that one, man? So in 1776, America challenged the idea. It was around the same time that France also had their revolution. So they decided, don't want the king, we can govern ourselves. So at the time, these two countries declaring independence in such a way was revolutionary. And it changed the world because after that, all these countries started declaring independence one after another. So this is why, guys, you have to pay attention to this. Whatever happens during this period means that you will see it will start spreading one after another. And that's why things do happen at a breakneck speed. Okay, so then this year, like I said, it happens in March, and that's how close we are. Today's date is the 28th of January. Basically, Pluto moves into March on the 24th of March, which means we are 2 months away. From that moment on, then you can start to see the Hollywood movie playing out already. Okay, so that's for the United States. And I also wanted to just do a quick look, okay? I have a lot to cover, but I just want to look at this, that Joe Biden, the thing is, isn't the president going to do anything? And I'll be quick with this, that Joe Biden is going to have some of the personal issues this time around, and it starts to go up from about March onwards. So there's a sense of imminent danger. The president is feeling like he's being persecuted. And so some of these dates, I'm just going to go on. And one of the reasons is that it can also affect his own family. I understand Mrs. Biden has just had an operation, that there's some cancerous lesions removed. And it's possible that he might not be so paying so much attention. His wife, it doesn't actually say that Joe Biden is going to be in any difficulties, but these indicators in his chart show that I cannot rule this out. Okay, and also, very recently, Joe Biden has been in a bit of trouble because he used to be vice president to Barack Obama, and some of these classified documents have been found in his home. Now, why this is very concerning is because when I look at the charts here, first of all, I see that from May onwards, the leader disappears. So that means he's not so active in terms of either he's been restricted, or that he just doesn't have the wherewithal to sort of pay attention to this. Could be because of the case, could be because of like health and personal development issues. But also at the same time, it's like some of these indicators, and if you look at the dates, it starts from about June onwards. And I would interpret this as being questioned. There are some secrets revealed. They are fighting back. He's basically arguing back with the people who find documents in his house. So the thing is, basically, the main point here is that Joe Biden is going to be very distracted in 2023. And that means he will not be able to be very useful in terms of what's happening in the world. So this will become very strong in July to September. And let me highlight that. Now, guys, at this point, I need to pause here a bit. Why we need to look at the USA is because later, as I show you what's happening in other countries, think about how in the Earth era, we always assume the US would step in. That means that the US will go and like interfere. And then the thing is, I'm basically questioning, you always depended on that. Now, this year, looking at what's happening in the country, are you so sure? Okay, so that means it could be that we will from now on not see an America who will respond to things. In fact, quite a lot of the things have been happening in the world that they are not really responding to already because they are very distracted. Okay, so that's that. And of course, then if I talk about Joe Biden, then I have to talk about Xi Jinping as well. Okay, so let's go and look at that. Now, I have to qualify here that for Xi Jinping, I do not have an accurate birth time. So I am working with some approximates here. But what I'm sharing here is what I can tell from his chart. So he started his third term just very recently. And there's been a lot of criticism about his performance so far. So what I see from the charts is that he will then, during this period, it's quite important for him that he will need to consolidate some power. And okay, I'll just click through these first. And I also see that at least for this year, I don't actually see him being very aggressive. A lot of it is passive aggressive. So that means he may seem dangerous, but he doesn't actually do anything. So he will step up like a demonstration of dominance. A lot of it is spoken, a lot of it is things that he will say, but not with actual violence yet. Okay, so, and he will practice restraint at least until December of 2023. I don't actually see any kind of like real violence. Okay, then, and also, but by December of 2023, a lot of tension and anger is going to build. So that means he's going to need to show a bit more of where he stands by around that time. Basically, he angry already lah. Okay, and so that would become at its strongest at around the turn of the year. Okay, so from December to about January. Okay, and this is a period of time between May to June where I think that some people are going to try to test his patience. And if you look at the charts here, he doesn't actually do anything. So at least not until towards the end of the year where he is a little bit more angry lah. Okay, but beginning of the year, not really. So the problem is that right now, there's very little patience running out for Xi Jinping because China has a lot of problems that they are facing, which I'll cover later. But what's important is that towards from October onwards, I can see that his patience has run out, and that he also is feeling a little bit criticized in the sense that he kind of needs to up his game. So that's what I do see. Now in October, there is a solar eclipse. That's the very last one that occurs somewhere in October. I don't know what event that will be, but that is an event that will make him feel that maybe I don't want to be so patient already. Okay, so that's what I see that. Okay, so that's for Xi Jinping. And then, of course, if we do Xi Jinping, we have to look at the charts for China as well. And I know a lot of people are waiting for this. Okay, so China's facing a few quite major problems, that their population has fallen for the first time. So they are no longer the most populous country in the world. And this is not a secret that basically their housing market has been in trouble for a number of years now, and being on lockdown for like massive periods over the last two years has not helped their economy. So in fact, some of the bigger things is that not only are the developers going bust, but now you've got millions and millions of Chinese people, some of them young people who want to settle down and have families, who are unable to get their houses because the houses are not being built, or basically the banks are in trouble now because people don't want to pay their installments. If I'm not going to get my house, I'm not going to pay. So the thing is, this has a ripple effect across the Chinese economy that it doesn't seem right now that anyone has a real solution to such a massive problem. And so that's why the first thing that I want to point out here is that this red indicator that I have on the chart actually shows that the weakness of the government is actually being attacked this year. So that means this green indicator at the top of the chart shows that it is a pain indicator, and that the beliefs of the government, basically the people will have run out of patience here. Now, this is something that we've seen starting to build up ever since the very strict lockdowns for COVID-19. So the people are basically making clear to the government, we don't always align with what you say is correct. And on top of that, let me deal with this red line that cuts across here. And this one is very important, okay? Because it starts to affect this Venus that's at the top of the chart. So if I'll indicate it here. So when Venus is in the ninth house, it tends to affect a few things. Number one, it could affect the position of women in China. And this becomes important because their birth rate is a really big concern right now. And it's that there will be a lot of movements in terms of a conversation about the role of women, how much freedom they have, and like whether or not do they work too hard, that's why they are not having babies, and things like that will start to escalate around this time. And you also see that Venus, when it's in the number 9 house, can also involve things like money that is international. So this can involve things like foreign exchange. It can involve the value of money on an international level. So that means, will China then be very involved in how money is moved, or how money is being valued in the world? So that's another thing that will affect all of us in terms of the economy. And so basically, I also see that there's a lot of this concept of the naughty children. And I have to explain why. Okay, in astrology, children can mean a few things. It can mean young people. So basically, all your millennials and Gen Z in China who are very clearly making their displeasure known to the government. So even things like their ideology. Some of you may have heard of Tang Ping or Bai Lan. So basically, the young people are basically saying, we're not going to play your game. So that becomes a big problem now. And children in a country's chart can also refer to what we call subordinate states. So this includes people like Taiwan and Hong Kong, because if China is the parent, then these are the children. So that means if there's some kind of disagreement with what the parent wants to do, then that could be termed as naughty children. So usually the issues are about things like property, families, debts, bank loans, And it's going to be a bit of a plodding year for China. So things don't move properly, and they could potentially get a lot of negative publicity, as if they are not already. And so that we can expect some unexpected developments in international relations and things like that. So this becomes ultra strong around December to March. Now, notice before that I said that Xi Jinping is he suddenly seemed to pump into action just about December. So that means, at least for this year, are you going to expect like a lot of major things happening? May not be, but the thing is, the fact that there's no major things happening can also be a problem, because everyone's expecting China to step up. And if China doesn't actually step up this year, then you have to decide for yourself how then does this affect you and your business and your careers. Okay, so this is basically between December to March is when things pop into more activity. So you basically have all these young people, and they are like protesting now, and there's really a bit of a warning to the leadership that this generation is not as pliant and compliant as their parents and their grandparents. So as I said, there's a lot of pessimism among the young people post-COVID, and also that the women are basically making very clear that we are not going to have kids because we can't afford it. It's way too expensive. And this one is a side thing. I in my research, I actually discovered quite interestingly that apparently in China, you're going to tell me whether it's true or not. Huh? If you get married and then you don't have kids, then the government actually calls your mobile phone to ask you like, hey, why you never have baby? And it's like, can I help with, have you been taking prenatal vitamins? Or it's like, I mean, it sounds funny, but the reality is it's come to that point where they will actually call your mobile phone, ask you why you got no baby, right? So, and I think what I actually want to show you with this chart is that for much of the year, I know you don't know astrology, but you'll find that the action really starts ramping up from about December onwards. I really squeezed their chart for everything really. I don't see much activity actually happening in China. So that's why it's not good for the economy. They need to do things, right? Otherwise, so some countries are going to get affected. Now, I also extended my timeline a bit to show you a bit of a sneak preview of what to expect in 2024. And it does look like next year, if you see this section here, let me move my cursor. So you can see from here, this is from March of next year onwards. It does seem like the ideology of China becomes very, very obvious. And China may feel like they are on a mission to make clear what their ideology is. And this is very important because Xi Jinping has been linked to a lot of the ideology of the original Mao Zedong sort of philosophy. And you will need to do your own research. But it also means that China has moved away from its original political ideology for a while because China needed to make some money. And I think it's also interesting that as we move into the air era, that when we used to expect certain countries to be very money-faced, that they will do things because money is more important than anything else, but you see, we're not Earth era anymore. And which means that sometimes some things, such as concepts and ideas, become a bit more important than money already. And China could very well be playing into that game from 2024 onwards. And they will feel a strong need to emphasize their ideology. Okay, so that's something I see. And if I draw my Pluto line, and then you can see that from about March onwards, things do start to shift in China. Okay, so then the next country that I want to cover, okay, here is Ukraine. And this one, everybody will be wondering, right? So let's start with the easiest question first. Okay, will the Ukraine war end? So here's what an astrologer does. So Ukraine, right? So I do the transits. And if you were me, if I want to know whether the war will end or not, I'm looking for like endings. Like I need to see all the bars got clear ending one. Then I know that it will end and on what terms it will end. Now you look at this thing and do you see any ending? I'm not sure about you, like I don't see any ending. So then basically, short answer is, will the Ukraine war end this year? No, it will not. And it doesn't actually look like, even far into 2024, I don't see a clear indicator, at least in the short term. I didn't do like every year, yeah, but I don't see in the short term that this is going to end. Now, the interesting thing though, as I'm looking at this chart, is the two black sections here. Now, what I see here, these are not actual indicators of threat to the Ukraine. This does not mean that Ukraine is not being bombed or that they are not suffering. I fully believe that to be the case. But the indicators actually show that the leader, now in this case, it would be Zelensky, that he is suddenly feeling quite insecure and that he will need to consolidate power, and potentially by about October to November, he may not be as popular as he has been. Now, this had puzzled me. So when I did the transits, I was like, why? Because this guy is like a bit like popular guy right now, right? And so I went and did my research, and here is what I found, is that he's basically, you see that there's a bit of a power grab in the background, and that there will be a need for the control of media by the leader in dealing with things like opposition and enemies. Now, if you tell me that he's managing the media because Russia and Putin, that one is understandable. But this does not make any sense, because if he wanted to control the media, it wouldn't happen in March of 2023. It would have happened a long time ago, last year. So the thing is, now I see that the leader is imposing restrictions in the company to stabilize and to control the expression of people who are opposing him. And I thought this was very interesting. And it would be very strong in Ukraine between March to June, and again in October to November. By October, he may not be as popular as he is right now. And I can tell you, I was scratching my head when I saw this. So I did my research, and it seems that he has now apparently suspended up to 11 pro-Russia parties. So these are the opposition parties that are in the Ukraine. And the funny thing is, I took out this paragraph from the article. It says that this suspension is actually completely meaningless for Ukraine's security. It's not like these parties are actively helping Russia. They are not. So apparently, for all of these parties, they immediately condemn the Russian invasion. They used to be pro-Russian, but ever since the invasion, they said like, yeah, we don't agree with this. And in fact, they are actively contributing to Ukraine's defense. So it does not actually make sense that he's doing this to protect Ukraine from Russia. So I am pretty much suggesting that he is doing this. So he's consolidating all the Ukraine TV outlets and the media, and he's starting to dissolve his rivals in politics. So it's like basically the world news on the Ukraine, you might see a bit of a sea change this year, that the poster boy Zelensky might be portrayed in quite a different light this year. Okay, so that's what my prediction says. Okay, and so the thing is, you see, now that I've covered the main ones, okay, so these three countries are pretty much where the whole invincibility discussion is happening in the world. And what I wanted to show you here is that invincibility is being challenged in the air era. It's like, if as I'm talking about these three countries, you're a bit sian already. It's like, why is it we keep talking about this who win, who lose thing? And if that's so, it's because the era has changed. We are no longer really interested in who's going to win the war, really. Everyone's tired of that conversation. And in fact, this is one of the reasons why I'm also suggesting that if you are dealing with the invincibility strategy in your work, that means if you are in marketing and the whole idea is to dominate the market, be the number one, like kill everyone else, it's like, and we can laugh at the US and China and Ukraine at taking on that strategy. But if we are being honest, some of us in various parts of our businesses and our industries, we are still on the invisibility model. And it's the whole idea of, oh, let's go to the top school, like make sure we choke the seat, then make sure other people don't get, because we want to dominate and make sure other people don't get this opportunity. And it's the invincibility strategy is still there among regular people as well. And you will have to decide for yourself, is this a strategy that fits in with the philosophy and the ideology of the air era? And also, there are some fundamental problems with invincibility, is that it only benefits the winners at the top. And why I keep highlighting on the USA is because the US has used this to their advantage in the Earth era. They dominate in every category. It doesn't matter, you pick anything, they are number one. And it got to a point where it's like everyone else is not doing so great, and it's like, and they've taken the benefit from that. And the result of it is that you find that the guy who wins doesn't actually win because no one likes you anymore. So this is it can be a bit of a problem, and it means that other people cannot contribute in a way that allows that equal contribution thing. So of course, even in the markets, I just randomly pick like commodity goods and things like that. But this happens in every industry, isn't it? In sportswear, in construction. And the thing is, quite often, even things that don't always require that level of domination is such that you cannot even play in that market at all, because the dominating player is so big, and they actually actively go with the invincibility model such that it kills everyone else off. And I think it is also one of the reasons that is contributing to that very, very wide gap that's happening in the world. And it's also why it could potentially lead to an uprising among people who have been suppressed for a very long time. Okay, and also another problem with the invincibility model is that it degenerates into an ego match. Then it's more about appearing strong than actually being strong, right? Is China really that strong? Is America really that strong? And people start to question really. When you start to like, it's very important to you that you must appear very strong, then people start to question like, are you really that strong or not? So that becomes a problem. And then we also realize that the victory doesn't even last. It doesn't last, which means recently, Elon Musk was so much hype when he became the richest man in the world. In less than a year, he's no longer the richest man in the world. So great, you're number one, and for how long, right? And then the next thing is that if you look at how America has dominated massively in terms of military spending, it far outstrips, even up to 2021, right? It's like no fight. You can add up all these other people, so they never even add up to their expenditure. But then the question is, you spend so much money, surely you must have an invincible military, right? That means your invincible strategy, it should work. And it turns out it doesn't, because a study was recently done just this year, within the last 2 years, that they've discovered that there is no US missile defense system actually proven capable against a realistic ICBM threat. So let me show you, after 70 years and 350 billion into this investment, it's the result of the study was that they were unlikely to do the job of defending the country in the next 15 years at least, and even from a small number of North Korean missiles. So they ran tests, they've done simulations, and the missile system CMI cannot make it. And so the thing is, and the US hypersonic missile has already failed for a second time. And that means, that's why I said I am challenging this idea, something that everyone has held on to for years and years and years, that if something happens, the US will step in. And the thing is, even if they do, is it effective? Like, can we get the same results as we used to last time? Quick answer is no lah. Okay, and you also see that right now, they are, again, just like Elon Musk, they are no longer number one. So when it comes to things like the Navy, China outstripped them already. And it's not even recent, it's like quite a number of years ago already. So in terms of the other parts of the military, China is catching up to the US. And not to mention that quite a few other countries are also actively catching up. And that's another problem with the invincibility model, is that everybody target you, right? Basically, you are now the new benchmark and everybody wants to beat you. And I'm not sure, is everyone tired of this thing already or not? Like this, you're number one, then I fight you, you fight me, then see who number one. It's not a fun thing, right? Okay, and then find even population used to be in the Earth era. Who got more population means more people buy things, right? Which means that your economy will be the best. That's why they panic when China had so many people. And the thing is, China, for all the panic, no longer number one. Now India is number one. So the thing is, okay, we want to play this musical chairs game, right? And then again, going back to our backstory of like buildings that are being built higher and higher and higher, and apparently we haven't learned our lesson, because then the idea is still Earth era style. Who can build a higher building? So right now there are lots of buildings being built. There's Merdeka Tower in Malaysia. China has got a few financial buildings being built, and plenty of them in the Middle East. And in fact, let me show you this. This is a new building that is being built right now. It's called the Jeddah Tower, and it's in Saudi Arabia. It's not built yet, still under construction, got some problems. But the thing is, look at this picture and you get the idea. Basically, it's so high until I'm not even sure what the guy in the top floor is actually trying to do. It's like you're probably going to get a headache from being up there. But the reality here is that they haven't learned. They are basically still playing the invincibility model. Okay, and at this point, like I said, I think it should become quite clear to a lot of people that I am seriously challenging and questioning whether or not does it make sense for you to play this game in the air era. And now when we come back from the break, okay, I will be talking about the safe zone. So this is another one of the strategies that have worked for a long time in the Earth era. And we're going to take a good look at some of the countries who are trying their best to keep things the way they were. And we're going to see in 2023 how successful they are going to be to keep things the way they were. Okay. So during the break, you can actually follow me on my social media channels. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And if you are new to my prediction webinars, you will be able to watch my past webinars on my YouTube channel as well. Some of the forecasts that I put in my more recent webinars, I may not be covering in this summit So it's quite worthwhile to go look at some of the old ones because I sometimes I don't repeat what I said in previous webinars and the timeline is quite long. Okay, so you can go and check that out. You can also join my Telegram channel so that I will actually be posting updates, more information as the year goes. Okay, so you can just scan this QR code to join. So the time now is about 11:06, and then we will take a break and we will come back at 11:15. Okay, I'll see you guys in a bit. Okay, guys, are you all back? Okay, say yes on the chats, right? If you are back, so that I know that I can continue. You be kind of want to make sure that people don't miss this stuff. Okay, the safe zone, very, very important. Okay, just say yes on a group chat if you're back. Okay, fantastic. And those of you joining in from Facebook Live, you can also participate, okay? It's just so that my team knows that you're back and then we can continue. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go on, okay, to the second strategy, which is the safe zone. And this is the one that we all very familiar with because it's very earth era, right? And it's like what I wrote here is the copy and paste, because then the whole idea is in the past during the earth era, one of the things that we were very good at is to build some of these major structures. We built corporations that were so big that you know that if you buy something, they will deliver to you on time. And there are all these government corporations that were very robust. And you knew that if they said that they were going to set something up, they would set something up. And that's why in the earth era, this copy and paste model worked really very well. So then most of us would basically say, well, you go ask your kid, go to school, go to university, get a job, then go and join the biggest company you can find, then faster start climbing corporate ladder. So this is what we call the tried and tested method. I don't think people have ever really questioned that very much during the earth era. And this is why, and most of the time, if you try to do something very different, then the usual commonplace logic that you get from everyone else would be, hey, but then this thing has worked in the past. It's worked for decades now. Why would you be questioning it? Well, I mean, the reason would be air era lah. Okay, so the thing is, with this copy and paste model, it means that we actually want things to stay the same. That's why it's very hard for some people to sort of think of, to envision a bit of a different life. And if you think about how psychologically, if we are in safe zone, right, and then you open your newspaper and you see that, wow, Jacinda Ardern has just resigned, it strikes something in your heart. It's like, it feels weird, right? Like you thought it would be stable, and then it's not that it is unstable, it's just that funny thing that hits you psychologically. And it's like the tendency is to want to use age-old methods. And I think slowly by slowly, everyone is starting to realize that when you use the old methods, it either doesn't work at all, or it kind of works, but then it's like, people are not very enthused about it. It's just, it barely gets through. And also you'll find that the safe zone is often motivated by financial security. So that means if you think about how in our business, that means you don't want to break the model, you don't want to like sort of get out of a copy and paste, because then people say, hey, but then the budget we spend already, right? We must make sure that we get the ROI ma. So that means that's why we copy and paste, because the whole idea is that nobody wants to take responsibility for the fact that we do something a bit different. And then what if it doesn't deliver that? Okay, better don't say anything. So that's why it's called the safe zone. And it's usually motivated by not financial profit per se, but I think it's more motivated by financial security. And that's why a lot of people freak out when their kids say, hey, mommy, I don't really feel like going to university. Then, oh my God, that everybody loses their minds, right? Because then what if you die? What if you starve to death? So if you think about it, quite a lot of people who didn't complete university are in the like very, very rich people. So it's actually not factually true. But this is why I said that it is not motivated by the need to improve, but it's motivated by a fear that we will die if we don't do the tried and tested thing. So it's a fear of risk, fear of financial loss. And I think this fear of risk can also include this fear that you don't want people to say that there's already a tried and tested method. Why are you such an idiot, right? Why you go and try something new, and then now you are the person who just doesn't look very smart? So there is a social cost to experimentation. And this is one of the reasons why the safe zone tends to be like that. So you find that as societies really adhere to safe zone, and there are lots and lots of countries. I know some of you are thinking like maybe I'm talking about only Singapore, but it's not just Singapore. In fact, just about every country is like that. So the tendency during the earth era, which actually was a very good strategy, don't get me wrong, is to adhere to authority and conventional wisdom. And for the longest time, it did work. And it meant that people bought their properties, people bought their cars, their kids were okay, everyone had money to spend at the supermarket, it was all good. And the thing is, if we take this strategy, then the idea would be to hope that things continue like they were in the earth era. And I think the biggest problem with the safe zone strategy is that it's quite clear that in 2023 and onwards, I don't think you can hope things continue like in the earth era simply because we are no longer in the earth era. So if you look at this particular picture of like people walking fast across the street, I am of course talking about Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is one of those places that if you think about the Earth era, apart from if you think about like the fast cities, the big banking and finance sort of story, yes, you get the New York Wall Street sort of story, but you also get that whole Hong Kong story. And for the longest time, Hong Kong was like this. So I don't know about you guys, but for me, growing up and also into my early adult years, this was how I saw Hong Kong. It's a bustling place. People are like, sometimes they talk a bit loud and then they're always in a hurry. There's a lot of commerce going on. People knew how to make money. People were excited. There's a lot of energy going on. And this is the Hong Kong that we knew from the Earth era. A fantastic place. Now, the thing is, have you noticed that Hong Kong went quiet? That at least in the last about 3, maybe 4 years, just about the time that the riots began in 2019. And ever since then, don't know about you, but when you look at newspaper nowadays, have you guys noticed that no one really, Hong Kong doesn't get mentioned anymore, doesn't show up? You don't hear about, like it used to be that you hear a lot of news about like Hong Kong movies or like some cool thing is happening in Hong Kong. They just went quiet. Like it's almost like nothing is happening there right now. And even this idea of we don't actually get a lot of updates about what's actually going on. And basically, Hong Kong has gone not just quiet, but also a little bit empty. And it's, when I say empty, I don't just mean that the streets are empty. Like obviously the people are still there and they're still walking around. But what I mean is that in terms of the economy, in terms of the activity. So even like, is there this sense that that things are moving in Hong Kong? And in fact, one of the things that has shown up in the last couple of years is an exodus. That means Hong Kong is actually losing people. And if you do your own research, you'll find that the population of Hong Kong has actually dipped very drastically. And quite a lot of the people leaving are, unfortunately, a lot of it is a brain drain. So that means there are a lot of these high-level executives, basically people with money, people with skills, people with the know-how have left, simply because there's no real space for them to do what it is that they want to do. So many of them are in London, they are in the UK, and in various other countries, some of the Western countries, and maybe some people are in Singapore as well. So the population is down, and it seems that it is not slowing down. So based on my research, it seems that people are literally trying their best to just find a way out of Hong Kong ASAP. Now, what happened to Hong Kong? So, and one of the reasons why you don't really hear much about Hong Kong is that there just isn't anyone left to report on Hong Kong, because this is just the reports from maybe about 1 to 2 years ago. China has essentially crushed all of their independent news outlets. They've been either closed down or arrested, or like, I don't know, somewhere in China where no one can find them. So basically, the world has now lost an important way to understand Hong Kong and China, because you no longer have a voice that's coming from China. And that's why they're shut up, they're silenced right now. And guys, why should you care? Because it's actually quite scary, isn't it? That you can just see a bustling, active place like that disappear like that in about 2 to 3 years. Okay, so it's something that if we don't talk about it, and then the media isn't talking about it because there's no one to report, right? And that means it's important to pay attention to the patterns that happen around us. We can't say that it's not happening here, then like we don't care. Right, so let's look at some of these patterns here. Is now this square that I have put out on the chart here, this red square here, is it indicates one of the characteristics of Hong Kong, which is that the people can be very natural activists. So of course, when we talk about activism, it's not always just about save the dolphins or that kind of activism, but in general, it means that the people can be very conscious of things like injustice, especially if it's injustice by authority figures to the people. Now, long before, when Hong Kong was still like the bustling place, you know that you wouldn't generally want to go and anger a Hong Konger, because they will make it known to you. It's not they're just not people that you would just bully and then get away with, you know. So it's a very vocal sort of a community. And it means that in the last 2 to 3 years that they've been silenced this way means that the tension is building up. So what we've got here is there are a few indicators that the activism will start to swell back again. Basically, when you try to suppress something, it will come back up. So that means, and you can see from February of 2023, so they're a bit ahead of the game. And what I see here is a mixture of fear and the need for protection to rally people with the ideology. So that means people are still afraid because of what suddenly happened in Hong Kong. And I did so much research that I actually saw a lot of comments from Hong Kong people who say that I just cannot believe what just happened to my country. It's like it just disappeared. So, and you find that people can be very roused and they're willing to fight for things like their roots, their rights, their home, and also for the next generation. So then the charts also indicated that they will lose more people, especially as things sort of tighten a little bit. And it doesn't necessarily result in actual activist protests and outcomes. So that means it doesn't necessarily mean that people are really out there like fighting on the streets. But in this particular placement also potentially suggests that a lot of this activism can happen in other countries. So that means it may not happen in Hong Kong because a bit hard to do this in Hong Kong now, but you will start to see that the Hong Konger communities that are sort of being set up in other countries will become very, very activist indeed. And it's quite possible that they are also, because with this indicator here, if you see like a lot of it is centered here in the 11th house, it's to do with a community. And it happens that in Hong Kong, there's quite a bit of this Aquarius signs that is here in the chart. So you can see the Aquarius that's here. And I think that part of this rallying may also involve people who are not Hong Kongers. That means there's a real call here for other people to sort of step in and be part of the movement, because it's what is being challenged in the world. And they're basically saying it's not just us, right? That this is going to affect a lot of people. And I suspect that they are probably correct. And this becomes really strong in between December to March. Now, if you've been following some of these important dates that I put out, then of course the big player here will be China. And I also mentioned that around December to March in China, there seems to be quite a bit more of that activity sort of rising also. China is sleeping dragon until around this time. So that means it really depends on how this activism plays out this year. Now, there are also a few other patterns here that Hong Kong itself will start to change the way they communicate. And I think for maybe the last 10, 20 years, the tendency is to want to talk in a more rational manner. That means it's more like diplomatic. It's like, okay, can we discuss this? Can we be reasonable? And I think that just about this timing, let me put the dates out, by the time we get to about August of this year, and you find that the criticism level goes way higher. And we all know that the Hong Kongers do have it in themselves to be extremely vocal. And it does seem like they've kind of had it with the nice conversation, no more nice conversation. So they're no longer interested in just making noise. They actually want to have the conversation where they have results. And that means they will engage. And if you look at this red line that cuts across the chart this way, that if Mars is here in the 7th house, then they want to see an actual one-on-one sort of course, Mars tends to be a bit of a fight, but I don't see this as a fight per se, but they definitely will engage and they are not taking no for an answer this time around. So they may actively try to partner a lot of authorities, communities, and that's why I see that there's a lot of active gathering of people who may or may not be Hong Kongers. So they don't just want to talk workable solutions. And again, I would say that it doesn't necessarily mean that it results in actual outcomes. Okay, so I would say that this comes up as what I call an early thrust that comes out around August to September. So you should see a lot more activity in that space. So if I were to show you again my Pluto line there, that it starts to rise. And if you recall, I also said that when Pluto changes sign, one of the things on the list is that people will start to speak up. So that means if they had been somewhat silent for a while, that you should see this start to build up. And as you can see, my bars start to build up more and more until it gets to about August, September, where the black bits start to begin and the movement starts going. So just about December to March is when the action is highest. The people are really feel like they need to stand up as a community. Okay, then, so basically, right now, you find that the Hong Kong activists in the UK are still worried. And in my research, I see that they are still quite careful about what they're saying in case there are repercussions for themselves. Okay, so one lady I saw, she said if she shows up at a activism event, she always makes sure that she wears a mask. to hide her face because she feels that there are people looking at like whose face is like their like facial recognition and things like that. So they are still very, very cautious at this point. Okay, so and of course, if we are talking about Hong Kong, then obviously I have to talk about Taiwan also. Okay, so Taiwan is next on my list. And so of course, that's the big story, right? Everyone wants to know, okay, is there going to be an invasion, right? And of course, for Taiwan, I think this picture says it all. When I found this picture, I was like, bingo, right? It really conveys it. That if you look at it, the irony here is that it's not really about Taiwan, is it? This looks like a fight between two powers, and it just happens that Taiwan is where it converges. And so one of the stories that I see here is that if you look at this red line, what it indicates is that there is a sense of fear, and that people in Taiwan will start to feel on the ground that it is not super safe. And sometimes this not super safe does not actually mean anything is actually happening. So that in my research, it seems that if you ask an average Taiwanese, they would say that not much actually has changed on the ground, but a lot of it comes from things like the broadcast media. And it comes from a lot of the politicians and bigwigs sort of discussing Taiwan with nothing actually happening in Taiwan yet at the moment. So another pattern that we see here is that I think when this Neptune is here in the 6th house, that once this thing starts kicking in, you'll find that daily life will start to shift for people in Taiwan. So that means up to now, it's just a feeling. But I think some things will start to move already. I believe that they've recently started to extend some of the national service for the young men in Taiwan. So these are some of the early seismic indicators that things will be heating up. There's reason to think it will heat up. And I also don't really like this square here because it also indicates that another thing that starts ramping up is the political discussion that goes on in Taiwan. And this doesn't necessarily mean that the Taiwanese people are the ones engaging. It can also mean that other people who are not Taiwanese people are engaging in that conversation, which increases the sense of fear. And so that's why I say it's the looming threats. I know that Taiwan has had looming threats for like since forever, right? But in 2023, it really starts to feel tighter. Okay, and that's why a sense of imminent danger on the home ground, and also that they start to become very wary of foreign influences. And I suppose one of the things that I could interpret from here is that if I see this Pluto here in the 9th house in the chart of Taiwan, sometimes it doesn't guarantee it, but it can also describe some kind of polarization among the Taiwanese people, as in maybe not everyone is going to be aligned about what they want and what they don't want. And that means that even among the people, like you could see some differing opinions here. At a time like this, unity is a bit more important. Okay, and also that daily life becomes very uncertain and it can be dictated by political threat. So that means if somebody says something and then we have to go and change something, and it starts to affect things like work. That means do people, I imagine if you work there and you wanted to launch a work project, and everyone sitting at the meeting table will be like, so this project is launching when? February next year. Then it's like, everybody is like, okay, so we do or we don't do, So it's like the problem with uncertainty is that sometimes uncertainty is worse than a real threat. Because when a real threat occurs, this is psychological, right? If there's a real threat and if someone is coming at you, at least you can see the guy coming at you and you know what weapon he has in his hand, right? But if the threat is there, you can't see the threat. You don't know what you're dealing with. And I think this is one of the biggest issues that will hang over Taiwan during this period, is that I don't know what to expect, when to expect it, and what exactly is happening. So that's why for the people on the ground, the daily life will become, it's hard to make plans and it's hard to know whether we do or don't do. It starts to affect Taiwanese economy in the Q2 onwards, as if it's not already affected, and you will start to see that the effects will start hitting. And this also means that I think we cannot be so short-sighted, right? We cannot just say that that one Taiwan problem, right? But because Taiwan is a very important people in the world. I'm not sure if you guys know this, they are the world's #1 makers of semiconductors, for example. And just so you know, like the laptop that you're using, your mobile phones, a lot of things that you use in your house need the semiconductors. And it's like, it also means that's just one example of how it can immediately affect the world economy. Like everyone understands this, right? So which means, and Taiwan produces a lot more than just semiconductors. And so if the economy starts to get affected, it's going to hit everyone. Okay, and this doesn't even require any fighting, even if there's no fighting. So that's why I say that for many of us, if you are like looking at my forecast in a smarter way, we don't just ask when is the earthquake coming. Sometimes before the earthquake comes, the seismic indicator already start to see people run away already. You know what I mean? So then the effect hits even before the earthquake hits. And that means if you're smart, you don't wait for the earthquake to happen first. You must see what's happening before. Okay, and I want to emphasize that during this period, I don't actually see any actual fighting. Okay, so I have to emphasize in case some people get the wrong idea. Okay, so this actually becomes the strongest between about August to September, where the tension can be the strongest. Okay, so basically, if I go and put in my March Pluto line, and then you can see again, that shift on the ground starts happening from about March onwards, and then by between May to August, the black section in the middle here tells you that's when a lot of the political bodies start to get involved. So there's a lot of talk here. And it's only by about September to November, just about here, is when I think the Taiwanese people can start to feel the tension becoming really, really strong. Okay, so like I said, the black sections do not mean that there's actual fighting. Now, I'm going to extend this a bit further here, where I don't have a slide for this per se, but it does look like just about August to September is when potentially it starts to affect the leadership of Taiwan. So we could start to see some new plans, new directives from the authorities, and including a change of guard. Okay, so that means it could mean that I understand that it's quite possible. In fact, I think it's already planned that Taiwan will oversee a bit of a change of leadership. And it also means that potentially new instructions, new policies can start to come up around this time. And if you look at the timeline, then it makes sense that if this occurs around here, then it's quite possible that that's why people on the ground start to feel like, okay, like we can feel that things are moving. All right, so that's what I see for Taiwan. Okay, then, so far, it just means tension, essentially. But I do see that the story changes a bit in the year 2024. Okay, so as I said, when Pluto changes sign, some kind of crisis can happen. Now, I know I want to be really careful here because I think it's like most people will jump to a conclusion that it's like, oh, confirm, then it's like it's going to be a war. And I think that I need to emphasize that there's the immediate conclusion, the obvious one, but there's also other ways in which this can happen. And this is where the limitations of astrology come up. Because in terms of a crisis can be a lot of things. It can be a trade embargo. You know, it can be the fact that I just don't, I put Navy ships around your island, then no one can come, then you cannot trade. You can have no fighting whatsoever and yet still have a crisis in a country. So I think I want people to understand that just because I say the story changes and that the people get affected does not always mean that bombs will fly and then like all the aircraft carriers will explode. Like I think we want to think a bit further, okay? I think it's so important that I must emphasize this, okay? So now, the reason why I say the story changes for Taiwan is that if you were to look at the timeline, so here I split it out so that you can see side by side, that around this period of time in January from 2024 onwards, you see like some of the patterns that started in Taiwan in 2023, they start to end already. And then I see new patterns emerging from March of next year. And then I want you to notice this black section that's here. It actually suggests that the people are like, this is a classic astrology indicator for the people are victims. So that means Taiwanese people are going to be greatly affected. And sometimes it means that they are deprived of things. It can mean that like life gets a bit hard for them. So these are the possibility. Now, by about May of 2023 on the 28th, so everything is happening here in May. So it starts to, people get a bit worried from about March onwards, but by May, it does look like there is a possible, there's no guarantee, but it does look like a lot of people will leave Taiwan. So that means that's another possibility, and that if people start to empty out of the country. And then I also wanted to sort of put this side by side with what I had shown you earlier with China. Remember, I said that China is passive aggressive for most of 2023, but that this changes between December to March of next year. And I also noticed, okay, so this one, just stick with me, okay? And that you see that, as I said earlier with China, that from March of next year onwards, that they would feel very strongly to make a reality an ideology that they have. So there are certain things that China believes strongly in, and that perhaps for a long time they put it aside because then money, right? And then they have like other things to deal with. But it does seem like they are willing to stand up for their ideology, and they might be willing to fight for it. Okay, so that means, again, I want to emphasize, this does not mean aircraft carriers exploding, and it doesn't mean bombs falling, yeah? So that it just tells me that they will take action, and that they are not going to just lie there and like let the naughty children make noise, okay? So then I also see that and the timeline is very similar. I don't know if you can see, this is 26th of March, and then here you can see is 4th of May, 26th of March and 4th of May. So the timeline links up directly. And also this idea of this black section that we see in China, it shows you that they are taking action, and it is driven by a strong belief. So this is why I also need to emphasize that in the Earth era, whenever we had wars, and this is the interesting thing that I think will happen when we transition from this Earth to air. In the Earth era, we had lots of wars, and World War I, World War II, and various other like funny wars here and there. And a lot of those wars were, quite frankly, fought for economic reasons. That means it's not a secret. A lot of people start wars because it's good for economy, right? Then it's like everyone makes money because of defense contractors and things like that. But in the air era, you're going to see that a lot of this kind of fighting may not actually be motivated by financial goals at all. And that means one of the more interesting things and important things that people need to understand is that in the past, a lot of the calculations as to whether someone will fight or will not fight, they say, they won't want because then not financially viable. So that used to be quite a reliable indicator for whether people will fight or not, because then you fight, then you lose money, then no one will do it, correct? But the thing is, air era, the criteria a bit different. So that means even if lose money, maybe there's other things that's more important than money already, and that could be something important that everyone must remember if you are making your calculations in that sense. Okay, so then of course that is the big Taiwan question: is the China's invasion imminent? So it seems that in my research, what other experts are saying is that Xi Jinping will probably have something else in mind, that a lot of people have pointed out quite correctly that there is a lot of distractions in China right now, a lot of problems to solve. And it is right now, based on what I see, I don't actually see any possibility for like a big fight in 2023. Again, I cannot rule it out from about March to May of next year onwards. Okay, so okay, next. Ooh, I just said that, didn't I? Okay, so now next one is next on my list is Malaysia. So our neighbors. So Malaysia, of course, the big story that came from last year was the hung parliament. And I was actually watching the elections very closely. And when I saw the numbers, it's like, you just have to marvel at the numbers sometimes, because, an election can result in just about anything, right? But when you look at these numbers, this is like almost like the perfect combination of numbers that would guarantee a hung parliament, that there was just no way you could combine these things so that there would be a clear outcome. So quite unfortunately for Malaysia, this meant that they were kind of stuck for a while, and even the Sultan had to step in and say, okay, I don't know, you people have to sort yourselves out and find yourself a prime minister, right? So now this is a pattern that has been going on for some time, and it actually started in April of last year. So I call this a legislative confusion. And maybe some of you listening, I know a lot of you listening are Malaysian, or you work in Malaysia, and perhaps you may be thinking, this is like not very new. It's like it's been the case. But I think it has heightened since April of last year. And of course, it coincided with their election. And this meant that there could be things like miscommunication, mistakes, errors of omission, miscalculation, and it starts to plague the administration. I've been watching the news, and I understand that they have had some ministerial changes very recently. And for the Malaysians who are watching it, I don't think this is going to be the last of the sudden ministerial changes. There will be a lot of these movements, and it could even be that at some point people not really sure who in charge of what. So that is what I kind of see. Now, a lot of the red lines that cut across 6 and 12 here start to indicate a bit of an administrative chaos. And it's not chaos in the sense that it's sudden change. It's the chaos that people not very sure what's going on. And this is not good news, obviously, in terms of for people on the ground. And why I'm bringing this up so important is that perhaps the people on the ground need to really pay attention to how we want to operate with each other. Because in the past, it's always been easier to just wait for administration to sort of give you guidelines as to, oh, if you want to do this, then this is the correct way. And again, like I said, this is a fundamental structure that people have not questioned in the Earth era for many decades. And I think from this year onwards, a lot of people, perhaps not so much in Singapore, where it really is quite well done, but in most other countries, you will see that people may have to start to negotiate their own ways of doing things, because then the old legislative administration may not be quite as reliable as it used to be, even if you think that your country wasn't that great to begin with. And also, by July, you'll find that public attention is going to be drawn to the fact that there are a lot of miscalculations and mistakes that are happening in the administration. So by November, a lot of facts will come to light. And if there's any attempt to sort of cover and pretend like, oh, this mistake didn't happen, the fact is now is era, information age, that it will come out. And that means that when the people do find out about whatever mistake there is, unfortunately, I can't tell from the charts exactly what error it will be, but I do know it will be a bit messy. So by about November, December, then I think there will be quite some anger that not only that there was a mistake, but potentially that there was an attempt to cover it up. Okay, so and then we have here by about November, December. Okay, that's the black color section. And of course, further from this is that I also think that when Pluto is down here in the number 4th house, similarly to a lot of countries, and I don't know if you notice, I pick a lot of countries where the number 4 house is being affected. And it means that people on the ground will start to feel this sense of like, the word I use is danger. But when I say danger, I don't mean someone going to bomb you. But when I say danger, it's like you just don't feel like things are the way it is. Like you just don't really know what's going to happen next. And it starts to affect this part of Malaysia where this is a little bit similar to the American story, where a bit of idealism starts to rise. And I think it's especially when things are not going well. This is human nature. When things are not going well with a current system, the tendency is to start looking around and see, like, is there a better system? It is human nature. And then, so what we see here is that, first of all, there will be extreme sensitivity. So this danger comes out of not the fact that you think someone's going to shoot you in the head, but rather it's like you want to be very careful about what you say, who you be with. So there's a lot of extreme sensitivity, and certain incidents will start to make people a bit upset. So it starts to involve the way that people do things, the way people present things, the way people display things. And the sensitivity is like, is it considered insulting or unacceptable to certain communities? And that's why ultra sensitivity. And I think that it could be triggered by some inappropriate comments, whether it is intended or not intended. So this can sort of show up between March to June of this year. Okay, so then now further from that is that I've mentioned a few times that Mr. Anwar Ibrahim was always going to have a hard time because his administration and his government are not fully made up of people who are his camp. And that means that he's had governing a country is hard, but governing with a bunch of people who may not intrinsically agree with you is always going to be a hard thing for Anwar. So he will find it very difficult to govern Malaysia during this period. And it starts to ramp up from about March onwards. So you will start to see, first of all, in the media, there will be like an indicator of like a rise of a bit of conservatism. And so things like some things would be deemed unacceptable, and it contributes to that feeling of like that people have to be careful about what they say and what they do. But on top of that is also that the administration itself is not getting a lot of support. Not from the parliament that they're in, and also from the media can be very critical of the government around this time. And understandably, it will make it very hard for them to do things. So this is where I think on the ground for a lot of the Malaysians is to understand that it's a lot of people want the solution, but the thing is also to create an environment where we can have a conducive way to create a solution. Because it's easy to point to somebody and say, hey, you are not helping, but sometimes the environment does not allow that person to make the solution. Okay, so then they want to rise of new cultural elements. And also, like I said, the powers of the country leader will start to get restricted. And the excuse that will be used is that, okay, I think the leader cannot do this because of like our roots or culture on the ground. So that seems to be the story. He may also experience some restriction to his access to funds. So that means it's possible that even if you have a good leader who wants to solve the problem, but solving problem need money. And if it means that there's enough criticism such that he cannot access funds or resources, then it is quite possible that the people who do pay the price eventually are going to be the people. So, and I see that some of these patterns start to rise a bit more in June to about October, November. Okay. And yeah, so basically from about March onwards, and there we have the Pluto line again. Okay, then let me just add a couple more, okay? And I also see that the people start to move. As I said, that sensitivity will rise. And on top of that, you also start to see that there are some authority figures who may be playing a little bit on the pain of the people. And this may not be the existing authorities. You may also see new authority figures taking advantage of the fact that some things don't work, and then they can basically try to make use of that. So what I do see is that there could be rise of charismatic leaders, sometimes from the ground. And it's also possible that if things don't work, human nature, right, then they tend to be very open to more radical or more eccentric influences. And it also means that it can be very attractive leadership message, especially to the people who feel broken or disadvantaged by the current system. And yeah, so it also means that somebody who talks about like a sweeping change can be very attractive if you, and it won't be difficult to convince people that, see, this thing doesn't work, what? So then we should have a new thing, brave new world, right? And it can be very attractive to people. So and the beliefs that come out around this time can be a bit regressive. So that means the message will be like going back to the roots, going back to the past, going back to the future, not back to the future, but doing what used to work in the past. And this becomes stronger around about July to September, and then it will build again from December to March. Okay, so that I know this is a lot, but in fact, what I wanted to sort of draw your attention to is in August to September is when, let me get my cursor out, okay? So that from about August to September here is where I think the people are most open to a new idea here. And especially later on, like I said, in November, December, if the administration has made a mistake of some sort and if they try to cover it up, then it becomes like a validation, right? So if someone say that, hey, this is bad, that we need a new thing, then some people may say, okay, never mind, we keep the old thing. But it turns out that the old thing not very effective, then this will come up even further. So that means it's very important to keep a voice of reason at times like this. Okay, and it also, of course, it will impact the people on the ground, whether you do your businesses or to go about your daily lives. And it's important to keep communication lines open. The big problem with Malaysia's chart in this entire space here is the lack of open and transparent communication. And in the air era, this is so important because it is the information age. And that means if you want to play with this air energy, people have to talk to each other. So that for the Malaysians who are listening, then what becomes really helpful around this time is that if you start to notice a lot of this sensitivity going on, it's quite useful to have people really talk to each other. Okay, and that to understand, okay, why is this happening, or what happened here? And this is the best way in which the people on the ground can potentially sort of help with the situation. Okay, so another thing is I talked a little bit about this safe zone, and I honestly feel that the safe zone is also being challenged in the air era, because if you think about how most people just want to, okay, we try to move down all the chaos, then guys, business as usual, right? That's the whole point about safe zone, right? The whole idea is to be business as usual, but it is not business as usual. In a lot of places, it cannot be business as usual because the situation has changed. And it really used to be that if you really go and join an organization that is very stable and you go to a place that seems stable, that you can just sort of set down roots and just be there. But the thing is, so right now I've highlighted a few countries, but that does not mean that I don't have the time to cover every country in the world. And this is, and because of the way that Pluto is moving into Aquarius, remember what I said earlier about what happened with democracy. That means one or two influential countries start the democracy conversation, and after that, everybody declares democracy and freedom and independence after that. So which means that if you start to look at some of these patterns, one of the clear things is that if the systems of governance, if the systems of how people talk to each other and how we communicate with each other starts to get challenged in this air era, it doesn't always mean it's a bad thing. And I realized that when every time I talk about this, then people get really upset. And then they start to feel like, wow, this is like a really bad thing. What can we do? Can you see like the doom and gloom and like powerless things starts to come up? And this is why it's important that I fully emphasize that the safe zone is a strategy that worked really well in the Earth era. And the only thing that really starts to bother a lot of people is that we try to use the same strategies to operate in the air era, and obviously it doesn't work. Okay, so this is why I think some fundamental things will shift so that people can understand that the new system has to work. And I think at this point, I think it's quite important it's a story I told in some of my previous webinars, that when the world moved from the fire to the earth era, now we just visualize, right? That in the past, it used to be like everybody would bow to the king or bow to the queen. Nobody questioned this, like we are a kingdom, like where was such thing as you don't bow to the king, right? But when the Industrial Revolution came up, and it could be that you had a relative who was very kind and got you a position in the palace, right? But let's just say if you were the millennial of the time, and then your auntie or uncle who got you a job there, then you find that not very attractive, like what time and age really, then still ask me go and like be in the palace, right? Then the fella says, oh, I'm not interested. I want to go to London and I want to be part of this new space. And you can imagine all the old people going like, yeah, this naughty kid, right? Ask him to go and join palace. Isn't that the correct way? You should do it. And then the young person say, no need. I go London and make my fortunes there. And you know, it's like sometimes it's if we can't see the rise of a new ideology, the people who remain with the old ideology will constantly feel that this world that's coming out is bad. London, bad. Start business. How dare they? You know, we must follow the queen, right? Hasn't it always been the case? So the thing is, if you are feeling strongly like, how come the world so bad? That's like, we are all of us, Earth era people, acting like, hey, why all these kids running off to the city? Of course, now we understand it because we grew up with that. And that means now we are holding on to the city and the business thing and then lamenting like, hey, why all these things are changing? Okay, so that's why it is being challenged. You can't deny that. Okay, so safe zone is being challenged here. And you see, the safe zone works if there are a few criteria here. Let's be voice of reason, right? Safe zone works if your leaders are stable and secure. So that means if you know for a fact that things aren't going to be screwed up, if you go to this place and you want to get this thing done and it is done, then your safe zone works. Okay, but the thing is, that is not the case now. So even if we don't talk about countries that are traditionally a bit unstable, let's look at really, really stable countries. I talked about the UK earlier already. So these are like opinion polls, right? And you can see that there's Boris, and then there's Liz, who clearly Liz Truss is like the lowest there. And then Rishi Sunak, which is the new prime minister, is doing slightly better than Boris right now. But you see, here's what the newspapers don't always tell you if you don't do your research. It is that there is a man here, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, Keir Starmer, who is right now the leader of the opposition, that he's been sort of doing this ding-dong thing with Boris so far. And it means that right now, if you notice, since the October of 2021, he's been rising in popularity. And I'm not suggesting here that there will be any change in the immediate future, but what I'm trying to tell you is that the opinion on the ground, that what people actually think and feel on the ground, often right now is starting to become so clear that it doesn't always reflect what is the actual leadership of the country. And of course, this can make the job of the leader very difficult if he's trying to introduce something and then the people being a bit naughty, right? And then they are basically saying that, yeah, you know what, we kind of preferred the other guy. And then we actually have a bit of a difficulty here. And this is why even if your leaders are not like bad, I'm not saying the leader has to be bad, but it just means that the leader may not be so stable like it used to be in the Earth era. And that means you have to question then your safe zone strategy. Then we also see that, like I said earlier, in Brazil, the fact that you have people who are very, very close in terms of like things like presidential polls and elections means that a lot of people are now questioning the legitimacy of that system. Just like in the past, why do you think all the nation states came up when Pluto moved, when we moved into the Earth era from the fire era? Why is it that suddenly everybody's signing treaties and we go draw a line, say this is my country, it's your country? Because people started questioning, why should this guy be king? Since just because you were born in a royal family does not mean that you have the right to govern the country, which is why everybody declared, like, I don't want to bow to king. We want to govern ourselves. So the thing is, usually when we change from one era to another, the change of the mindset in the systems that we use typically come from the fact that people are questioning the old system. And that means if we are being smart about it, guys, that means you have to look at what is happening in the world right now, such that we question the legitimacy of leaders. And that's why all the leaders across the world are having such a hard time now. And this is why even for a lot of elections are being challenged right now. They used to be in those unstable countries, but in the stable countries, it was never challenged. And right now, we are having this problem over and over again. Okay, so that means, can you do anything about this thing? You can't. But what you can do is to start thinking about what then does it mean for people like you and me on the ground. So that means, are you going to pretend that this system can continue in the next, 10, 20 years? You are dreaming, right? So that means it won't. And the tension will get stronger and stronger. That means you have to prepare for a new system. It's a fact, okay? And then, so another problem is that the safe zone also works if you are aligned with the values and the plans of the leaders. And as I said, it starts to become a bit of an issue now, because in many, many countries, this alignment is not always there. And I showed you in the UK, it's like that. Possibly in Malaysia, it's like that because Anwar's party did not get a clear majority. And that means it's not his fault, but the fact is that's the fact of the matter. Okay, and also that the safe zone strategy works if your situation can be trusted and predictable. But as I showed you with Hong Kong and with Taiwan, you can't be sure that when you set a plan like the way we did for the Earth era, is that, oh, in 5 years' time we sell our HDB flat, then in how many years' time we are going to like buy back and then earn how many percent profit. And just think about how Earth era that is, and it is the assumption that the situation is trusted and predictable. And this is where a lot of those plans had worked. And especially if you start looking at like financial data or like political data, and people show you past data for the last how many years. I've always said in my prediction webinars, I think your data doesn't go far back enough. Their data is 20, 30 years maybe. My data goes back hundreds of years, and history repeats itself over and over again. So that means unless we think we are very special and things are different, history will repeat itself. And that means the safe zone strategy, I would challenge it if I were you. Okay, and you also see that, can you see that people don't align really? Macron has won the presidential election against France, one of the more stable countries in the past. But the far right is now upping its game. The conservatism is rising. And also in America, most of the Republicans impose over and over again, they support declaring the United States as a Christian nation. So which means Christian nationalism is on the rise. It's a fact. And even for the Hong Kongers, it's shocking how quickly Hong Kong went from free and liberal to simply authoritarian. It's a fact now. Okay, so that means, and also things that we have taken for granted. This idea that you join a spanking, bright new tech company, this has been challenged. A lot of people talk about, oh, actually it's because after COVID, then they like happily hire. That could be the truth. But there are also other things. And it's like, that's why I say, if a company operates in a very Earth era sort of mentality, there can be a lot of problems with transiting into the air era. So Amazon cut jobs, Meta cut jobs, Alphabet cut jobs, Microsoft cut jobs, SEA in Asia also cut jobs. So the thing is, it's not something that you can depend on nowadays. And another thing is also that I also want to challenge one more thing, which is that, but then there are some places where all these boxes are ticked. Basically, the leader is stable and secure. It is granted, and that in general, that people are aligned with the plans and the values of the leaders. That one, tick the box. Okay, granted. Okay, then after that the situation can be more or less. That one I'm not so sure. That one, the tick you tick halfway. I'm not so sure about that. Okay, but that staying in safe zone. Let's just say, even if we can maintain your strategy, does the safe zone actually make people happy? Is another thing that we want to look at, because I showed this before, that workers are going into this great resignation. You talk about job security, but these people are quitting their jobs, right? And then also, even like we talk about the Iron Rice Bowl. at least from my country where I'm from, the iron rice bowl is the public sector, be a civil servant, right? And the thing is, even right now, they are starting to see that employee happiness is a very big problem now, right? Because you can see even other sectors, of course, we all know that the medical sector, healthcare sector has lost a lot of civil servants, but even in education and the military, I have contacts in teaching, and also some of the people I know in the military are telling me that it's really hard to keep people nowadays. And in fact, in a speech in 2022, like Mr. Chan Chun Sing actually said that the resignation rate for the management executive scheme, the people listening here who are Singaporeans, that's a really good scheme. It's what your mother would want you to be on, right? Because it's very good. And the Chinese New Year, everyone says it's very good, right? Yeah, it's now, there's a resignation rate of about almost 10%. 1 in 10 people are leaving your very, very good job. So the thing is, even if your safe zone continues, it seems that people are not happy and they're not fully aligned with it. There are also indicators that lawyers, that's another thing that your mother say very good, right? Because your mother from the Earth era, that lawyer very good. But the thing is, lawyers are leaving. And it seems that the majority of them are junior lawyers, young people who have served less than 5 years. And in fact, right now, they're already admitting that there are a lot of factors coming together. It's a perfect storm of potentially the legal profession. When young people don't want to stay, then it's a question that you have to ask already. And in the UK, you find that doctor, another one, your mother say very good, right? Doctor also don't want to stay already. So in fact, 1 in 2, that's 50%. Half of all the doctors, they want to leave and they want to pursue non-medical careers. They might走了, And it's like, and also that most of them say that they would like to have a career change. Of course, it says here more female doctors than male, but the fact is it's a large number of people in good jobs, safe zone jobs, who do not want those jobs. And also, Wall Street Journal says even the accountants are quitting now. Another one, mother say good job, right? And also, even the accounting majors from the university are making clear indicators that I am not going to be an accountant even after I finish my degree. So what gives them? And the thing is, these are the good jobs, especially rising in the Earth era. And what we see more and more is that this safe zone doesn't make sense for this new generation. Okay, and I think one other big thing is that psychologically, the safe zone puts everybody in a very in a very weird space where, in a sense, you kind of feel like you're stuck, because then I have to do X, Y, Z because money, right? And the only thing that can unlock you for your misery is let's make some money. Money is the best thing ever. And I've said this so many times in previous webinars. Like, seriously, who is a bit sick of this money conversation? Like, can you all say yes? Just so that I know that I'm not the only one thinking like it's quite sian, right? It's like that money is the only thing that can unlock you from that safe zone. Okay, so that's it's a problem already. And you find like burnout. So you can talk about Gen Zs being burnout, but if you ask me, I think a lot of people are burnout, just that they stay because money, right? And then also you find that even in Singapore, where I'm from, the rates of employee burnout are among the highest in the world. Okay, so 1 in 5 Singaporeans feel de-energized at work. So basically, you zombie walking to office. And also, a staggering 85% of employees felt the risk of burnout. That's just about everybody, And so if you're feeling that way, you're not alone, right? So then the question is, safe zone, guys. Does safe zone make sense? You see, so what if it continues? And is there a part of a lot of people who feels that maybe safe zone, not such a good idea? Okay, so guys, I'm not going to give another break. I will go on into the next strategy. Okay, so stick with me until 1 p.m. Yeah. Okay, so the next strategy is when we move a little bit away from the true blue Earth era, that one confirmed safe zone. Yeah, but of course, we have decided from about 1981 onwards, when the air era began, that we have already begun our transition from Earth to air. So it's not a new thing. It started in 1981 when computers invaded your home. So this third strategy is called innovation. And this is, of course, the buzzword now. And a lot of people think innovation is like a new thing, right? Since pandemic, then we all very innovative. But actually not really, because when you talk about how cash registers change the way we look at finance and businesses, that alone was a game changer. Okay, software was a game changer. So innovation's been around, and let's have a look at how innovation's been played out. Now, typically, this strategy involves, so that means if right now you look at your 2023 plan, you should have come with your plan, yeah? If you look at your plan and it's this strategy, which is that, okay, maybe May is correct. This Earth era thing not so good. So we adjust. Okay. Then usually the purpose of it is motivated by we identified some problems. And then we try to use technology to solve. Maybe it's like, oh, pandemic, people cannot leave their house. Okay, use technology, use mobile app or whatever it is. So it's a problem-solving approach. Then another way is that innovation is right now, at least, because there's a lot of fear going on. So it's being touted right now as a way of maintaining your relevance. Because people are a bit scared that it's like, maybe if I don't innovate, then you will like die, right? So that they want to remain relevant. And also a way of maintaining profitability. That means if you're not relevant, then you like cannot make money. So that's why a lot of innovation for this reason is being driven by profitability. That means if you want to go and innovate and invest in something, then the question is, what's the ROI? And this is the part where I brought up a few times that the innovation that's happening right now is not completely air era, because before they do any innovation, the first question they ask is, what's the financial ROI? And that's the part that I think is making the innovation thing a little bit plodding along. It's not quite the speed that we think it can be. So when we look at innovation, the first country on my list is Indonesia. Okay, and so for Indonesia, what then is the biggest story that's coming from Indon now is that the capital city, Jakarta, is sinking, like literally sinking down. And can the government's plan save it? So of course, if you've been following the news, one of the big things that's happening is that Indonesia is moving their capital and it will replace Jakarta as the administrative capital. So this new capital is going to be really far away. So moving from where Jakarta is to Kalimantan, near to Balikpapan there, where there's a new capital called Nusantara. And this here is a nice image of what Nusantara is expected to look like. So this is the architectural like design thing, right? Looks good, very air era, a lot of greens, and it's like looks like no cars, and looks like nice environment, very green, you know, and very high tech. So this is the plan as it looks like for now. Okay, and then, but the thing is, what then does the forecast say? Is that similarly, again, I have this planet here. So Pluto in the 4th house means that people are not feeling so safe. It's that same thing as we saw in Malaysia, where it's that feeling of maybe we can't be free to do whatever it is that we wanted. And then on top of that, there's also some indicators here, again, similar to Malaysia, that the leaders or the people who are running things can be quite limited in terms of being criticized by the media. And this can also mean a limitation to their access to funds. So there are some similarities between what I see happening in Malaysia and in Indonesia also. So that you can see that there's some control of the press, and also like to try and control the conversation. This starts from March onwards. So fear and control on the ground, but it can also go the opposite. So sometimes people can feel that sense of like something is up, right? Because then you see there's a lot of propaganda. Then they start to tell you, it shapes the narrative. It also encourages support for the projects that they want to do, and sometimes to raise funds. That means we need the money to do things. And I also see some small indicators that there could be a discussion in April or May that may have a bit of financial repercussions. So this is strong in the middle of the year, April to June. And then after that, what we do see here is that the leaders can take a very different direction for what they've normally done. I think for a lot of people, the announcement to move the administrative capital from Jakarta to elsewhere came as a bit of a surprise to some people. And it's a bit like, huh, really? They're moving Jakarta? You know, so it starts with that already. So by July this year, you'll see that unfortunately, a lot of the decisions that are being made by the leaders, they will be perceived as like, like a bit, is this a bit questionable, or is there some kind of irresponsibility associated with the decisions? And you find that the people are not exactly happy about it. And the backlash here is that the leader may decide to quell the opposing opinions, basically don't want to hear the criticism, and he might just do as he pleases. So that this happens from about August to September. So this is one of the new rules that came out that right now is banned already. You cannot insult the president. So that means you can't do this on social media. You can't do this in the press. Okay, so that's, yeah. And also that there's actually quite a bit of public opposition to moving Indonesia moving the capital to Nusantara. So this was as of October of 2022, just a few months ago. The decision has been made that they will be moving it despite the opposition. So this is where, if we look at the timeline here, so from about March onwards is where the Pluto thing shifts, and people will change their opinions on things. Just about this August-September period is when it's possible that the leaders may make some decisions that people are like not very sure about. And that's why by October, November, the criticism of what's being happening can be quite high. And I think the people will make their unhappiness quite obvious. And so that means it is not impossible that they will speak out, even if it's not allowed. Okay, so that's something that I noticed. Now, Indonesia itself is also moving, they are sort of evolving a little bit. And one of the patterns I've noticed is that the authorities may actually move into a space where they may not be as realistic with their plans as they really should be. And also in terms of financial management and the management of resources, that it's not always feet on the ground as they had maybe used to be. So a lot of these unrealistic expectations start to rise very quickly from about March onwards, again March. And then they will champion an idealized process, a solution, as if this thing will solve all the problems. And there's a lot of resources that's required to meet this outcome, but there are practical limitations of land and construction that could be a very big problem. Also things like quality aesthetics, like you can do things, but how well it is being done is also one of the big things that they may not be so realistic about. So this becomes really, really strong, again, from December to March. Okay, so that's where things start to show that it is really not that realistic. So this beautiful construction thing does not come cheap. So from what in my research shows that it will take approximately 35 billion to construct this new capital administrative city. And my understanding is that up to about 80% of this amount is going to come from private funding. That means not from the government coffers. And that means there's a bit of fundraising involved. But you see, I hope everyone understands that this new city is not a business city. It is an administrative city where laws are being made. And sometimes it gets a bit complicated based on my research that if 80% of the cost of this thing are being borne by private companies, that this may have an influence on laws and policies that are being made here, especially if some companies build the building that you operate in. So about 80% of it is going to be privately funded. Okay, so that's there's a bit of that Earth era things still lingering in this particular plan. It looks good, but it looks very Earth era also. Yeah, and also, like I said, the unhappiness sort of really builds up. So the unrealistic expectations become very clear by about December to March onwards. So already people may be showing their displeasure by October, November, and it seems that the things that they complain about may start to play out here. I also see that from December onwards, there's a bit of kanchongness, there's a bit of anxiety to get things done fast, especially if things are too slow. So there's potentially a bit of a rush job. And one of the reasons why it could be a rush job is, I think I didn't put it in my slides, but I think the intention is to celebrate National Day in 2024 in August in the new city. So now I understand that the construction of Nusantara started in July of last year. So that means they only have about 2 years to build the whole thing. And there's a lot of forest to clear. There's a lot of like commercial farming and stuff, which they need to clear that, cut down all the trees and then build that thing to be ready in August of 2024. So that's why in terms of it being a bit of a realistic timeline, can be moving things a bit tight lah. Okay, and so that's where by April of 2024, so that's like next year, not this year, by April, it may become quite clear that the ideal may have fallen short. And so one of the issues here is like, now the ideal is not just about whether the building nice or not. I don't think anyone like really cares whether the building is nice or not. But what's important is that the buildings there are supposed to be the administrative place. So that means administrative means people who look after the roads, people who look after the economy, people who look after healthcare and all the government stuff. And if it means that even if everything is nicely built, I think we all agree that moving people, administrative office from one place to another can be quite a big endeavor. And it also means that along the way, there are distractions, which means it can be very hard for good people to do their job. And that means the actual operations do not match the vision that's professed. So that means a lot of the details might be lost, because then people can't do their jobs when there's all this stuff going on. So practical operations become obstructed, delayed. So that means for the average person who lives in Jakarta or lives in Indonesia, or not just Jakarta, but whole of Indonesia, because this is the administrative capital. And for any of us who operate in businesses or operations that deal with Indonesia at all, that means that you could realistically expect some delays, because then they are moving their operations, right? Yeah, so that is quite possible that some people may not be very happy with the delays. So then you'll find that by about the middle part of 2024, that some of these delays might affect people enough so that they want to say something about it. Okay, so that's where by about April onwards, you can see some of these things start to shift a little bit. And again, this is important because they intend to open the place officially, celebrate National Day in here. This line here in August of 2024. So here we are, and that's how much time is left to move everything there and be operational. Okay, so now there are obviously some potential problems here. Is that the cost of building is high and they're seeking investors. So that's the one big one. And what's important now, this one everyone needs to pay attention to, because it's not just Indonesia. There are many cities in the world that have this exact same problem. It's just that right now, Indonesia is one of the one on the spotlight, but they are not the only one. So it doesn't solve a problem called subsidence or subsidence. And let me show you what this means, okay? So when a city is built like that, okay, I do a lot of research. So when a city is built like that, and you know, in the Earth era, cities are, at a basic level, they are very heavy. Guys, it's concrete. The building is a skyscraper and the city is very heavy. So that means just from that alone, it is putting a stress on the land. Now, on top of that, there's something called groundwater underneath. And when you have a lot of people in a city, they need to drink water. And it also means that the industries, they need water. And sometimes when the city doesn't have an easy access to fresh water, sometimes the easy thing to do is to just grab it from the groundwater. So you just keep sucking and sucking all the water up. And it means that after a while, the ground becomes a little bit like there's this void there, right? So then with the weight there, it starts to sink down. So this is why you will notice a lot of coastal cities are sinking. Just so you know, Jakarta is not the only one. I understand Ho Chi Minh City has a similar issue. I understand that Tianjin in China may have a similar issue, and there are plenty of coastal cities that have something quite similar. So it's not just Jakarta. And on top of that, the sea level is rising. So if you look at this GIF here, right, it basically means that when the water rises and goes past that little edge there, that's why it starts to flood. Okay, so that's where they can move the capital, which means that the president and all his departments, they can all move to Nusantara. But don't forget, there are 10 million people in Jakarta right now. And most of the big businesses, all the HQs, they are all in Jakarta. There's a lot of people in Jakarta. So you can move the administrative capital, but these guys remain. And all the business activities are there. And guys, this is what Jakarta looks like every year when it floods. It's like those are major roads. And basically, the flooding is not a little bit, it's a lot. And it starts to affect many other things. Operations can be vastly affected. People don't leave their house. It's hard for vehicles to move. And it means that damage and things like that is a huge problem. And cleanup wastes everybody's time, and like nobody is in a good mood. So the thing is, Jakarta will face this problem even if you move the administrative capital. So the big question here is that, are there other big cities elsewhere in the world that is going to face the same problem? Just that Jakarta one, very obvious. So it's sinking so fast. According to New York Times, it could actually end up underwater. So that's, and if I understand, the sinking is actually accelerating on a year-on-year basis, which is why they're in such a hurry to move the administrative capital away. So there are other issues too here, because then there are concerns that because it's so far away and Nusantara is in the middle of like nowhere, and that means it could potentially be a white elephant, because the civil servants who live in Jakarta, you ask them to move there to work, then some people are saying, now they have to think already, safe zone or my own comfort. Because the safe zone means I keep my civil service job, right? My iron rice bowl. And then at some point, now it's the air era, when you are faced between a stable salary versus like something else, which may be more important than a stable salary. What if I choose the something else? And the thing is, what if? Because now we don't know. And that in my research, it seems that polls have shown that a lot of civil servants are not willing to move to Nusantara. So then what's going to happen? So it's some people are concerned that what you see here on this picture is a Naypyidaw in Myanmar, which is a capital that they built for something similar story. And apparently nobody really wants to live there. So the whole thing is a ghost city where the capital is supposed to be, and it's not. It's basically made things very difficult for Myanmar. And how are you going to hire your civil servants if nobody wants to work there? So there is a legit concern that if Jakarta moves their capital, there could be quite an operational problem. Okay, and Jakarta is a very, very big country. Their population is like top 3 in the world right now. There's a lot of people who may be affected. Okay, so yeah, so I think what's important is that I really need to emphasize that even if you don't live in these countries, it's quite important to read newspaper, because a lot of these things will affect, because we do business with them. We have colleagues, we have teammates who are from these places. People will be affected. And it means that for people on the ground, and it means it's quite important to understand that because of this sinking city thing, which is going to affect many, many cities in the world, that means, logically speaking, in the air era, last time, everybody want to go city because city got money and city got all the convenience and all. Now, in the pandemic, we started to see this dispersing. A lot of people start moving out of cities. For those people in countries where moving to the countryside is an option, some of us live in countries where there's no countryside. But when there's a countryside option, people have started clearing out. And that means this is a trend that we will see in the air era, that cities will empty out. And it means that cities are an Earth era concept. That means, in fact, London was the very first one, because of its development, became this mega city, which didn't used to exist in the fire and the earlier eras. So that means, and this is how you get your New York cities and your big LA, Californias and things like that too. So which means that if you move into the air era, you have to look at your plan and don't just think about 2023. That means may not be in the country where you're from if you don't have a countryside, but in other countries, people will start moving out of cities because of all the Earth era problems that were created before. And that means things will change. Companies will change. The way people work will change. The people go to school and how they connect with each other is going to change. And that means your plan must reflect all of these things. Okay, and okay, so I would like to cover one more country, and this is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, right now in the news, mainly because of Mr. Cristiano Ronaldo has now gone to play for Saudi Arabia. And this guy, being one of the top footballers in the world, used to be quite unthinkable that someone like that would go and choose to play in Saudi Arabia. So now it's drawn attention to that. There must be a reason why he's there. So, and of course, another big reason why we want to pay attention to Saudi Arabia is because of its position as one of the world's top producers of oil. And with the Russian invasion, I can tell oil is like number 1 on a lot of economic concerns right now. So let's look at what's happening in Saudi Arabia. Now, the first thing is that Saudi Arabia has had some agreements in the past that are not always in their favor. So that means in the 1970s, after Nixon had basically taken away the value of the US dollar by making it fiat currency, then he needed to find a way to sort of stabilize the currency. So one of the things he did at the time was to go to Saudi Arabia and say that let's do a deal that from now on, people who buy your oil must buy in USD. And then, so therefore, the petrodollar was born. And one of the reasons why in the world right now, almost all international transactions are in USD is largely for that reason, because then oil is such a big thing in terms of cost in the world in the Earth era. So the thing is, from March of 2022, that was last year, that they started to want to reclaim power over very restrictive oppressions. So that means if Saudi Arabia does not really have a lot of freedom to move in some things because USD, so then you have to listen to USA for many things. So the thing is, what happened in March last year was that they started to become a bit not so confirm, a bit more vague, more non-committal when it comes to international agreements. So what happened last year was this, that MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, actually started to tease the media and to say that maybe Saudi Arabia may consider accepting the Chinese yuan instead of US dollars for Chinese oil sales. So this becomes a bit tricky because then this may renege on his original agreement with the US, but he didn't actually do it, or at least nobody knows that, but he didn't actually do it. He just said maybe he will consider. Okay, so then this actually started to affect the world, because then this will affect the USD and the power of the United States dollar. And if you recall, guys, I also mentioned that if you cross-check that with my forecast for the US, it seems that the USD was going to be very strong, very dominating during this period. And basically the question is, are you giving people reason to like sort of take you down a peg or so, right? And another thing is, that's big thing is going to happen in Saudi Arabia is this thing that I call the renewal of leadership. So I pick my words, but the thing is, this essentially means that anything that affects the sun in a country's chart refers to the leader. And Pluto can mean this concept of death and rebirth. That means one go, new one come sometimes. So death and rebirth of a leader, and then that following which there will be a lot of speculation in the media about whether Saudi Arabia will actually change the way they do things. Because after all, the Crown Prince has talked about it for some time now. Now, the current king of Saudi Arabia is King Salman. His health has not been good. So that means last year, he did go to hospital at least once for a week-long stay. And a lot of people agree that MBS, his crown prince, is effectively running Saudi Arabia right now. Now, the chart suggests that if there's a transfer of power, it is relatively smooth. So there will not be, it will go as people expect. So that means he's not in good health. There's quite a good chance that MBS will, whether officially become king or whether he simply gets way more power, it really doesn't matter. The point is he gets more power. Okay, and so the thing is, this occurs somewhere here in this April-May period. Quite likely, we are going to see that possibly even as early as March, the transfer of power may happen. Okay, then the next year is that he may be considering a lot of new alliances because Saudi Arabia needs some new friends. Okay, and this happens from about June onwards. So what I see here is that the confidence of Saudi Arabia rises. Now, if I'm correct about what I said earlier, that means by about April, May, he gets more power. And that means that his confidence is now higher in terms of what he can do, especially when, if anything here affects Venus, this planet Venus here is going to affect things like international trade, as well as the value of money. Didn't say whose money lah. Okay, so that but the chart does not suggest that he definitely makes a stand on changing currencies. It doesn't. Okay, so just so you know. But he's looking for more freedom because he needs some new friends. And it does seem that by August, September, those new friends are going to happen. Now, why is this important? Because let's talk a bit about oil thing. Very important, yeah? Is that in 2021, here are the list of the top 15 oil exporters in the world, with Saudi Arabia being number 1, and Russia and Putin being number 2. And then after that, also things like Canada and whatever. And you can see that the US is at number 6. Okay, and if you look the whole list there, don't see China on the list, right? Just saying. So in 2021, here's how it stands. But you see, in 2022, that was last year, a very major thing happened, which was the invasion of Russia, or invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And this meant that it created an oil problem. I'm sure you all know, right? And this means that the US started to feel very, very insecure. And that means that because then Russia was starting to play some games with the price of oil, and because they are the second biggest producer at the time, and which means USA decided that, okay, we can't screw around with this, right? So they started to produce their own oil. And so the thing was, suddenly the US became a very big player. Last time in 2021, they were number 6. By last year, in 1 year's time, US became number 1. So that they surpassed the Saudi Arabia as being the number 1 producer. As of November last year, USA is number 1. And you can see Saudi Arabia is number 2. And interestingly, look at who's number 5, right? So if you thought that USA quite power, right, from number 6 can go to number 1, got some people even more power from not on the list become number 5. So the thing is, this is where the state of oil production and fuel production in the world stands. And this is important because I can tell you the dynamics are going to shift here a bit. Because quite frankly, if America is producing their own oil, it's another way to protect the USD. Remember, I said that they will do everything in their power to protect the value of the USD, which means the moment MBS starts playing with the idea that maybe I will accept renminbi and Chinese yuan, right, for the sale of oil, then potentially if the US surpasses Saudi Arabia, then the world will still buy oil from US, and that means they can still protect their USD. Very important to understand. Which means that if MBS is going to sort of like continue playing the game, because now the USA could just cut them out completely. It's like, now I produce more than you. So that becomes a problem. So as you can see, this is also a bit of the invincibility game, if everyone can see here. So which means if right now the invincibility game doesn't quite work. Now MBS happens to be a millennial. He only 30-something years old. So now he played a different game. He played innovation game. And that means he decided I need some new friends. Now, last year, if we talk about world organizations, a lot of attention was put on NATO because of the Ukraine war. A lot of attention on, as usual, the United Nations and also the European Union. A lot of attention there. Now, here's an organization that doesn't get a lot of attention. That media don't always report about this. But if you ask me, guys, please pay attention to this organization. It's called BRICS. And BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And very soon, possibly with Saudi Arabia on the list. So BRICS is going to expand soon. Saudi Arabia is very keen to join. Guess why, right? So, and the thing is, look at this team. Now, if Saudi Arabia joins, look at how the dynamics will shift. Number one, in terms of the population, even now without Saudi Arabia, China and India are on the list. So is Russia. So that these are all the very, very populous countries. And BRICS actually represents more than 40% of the global population, i.e. half of the world's population are going to be controlled by BRICS. And then on top of that, if you add Saudi Arabia to the list, then we also add in the oil factor into BRICS. So that means forget about European Union, forget about NATO, BRICS is the organization to watch in 2023. And it means that right now, if you ask me, does BRICS want Saudi Arabia to join? Yes, of course, they want Saudi Arabia to join. Right? It makes a lot of difference here with regard to, especially for China and Russia and India, to have Saudi Arabia there. Now, another reason why this organization is so important is that apart from North America and Antarctica, all the big players of all the other continents are here. And this is why, in terms of, I also see here's another dynamic that will shift as MBS does this little innovation thing. And as this thing shifts also the invincibility story, because then we start to see here, not just a US versus China. Okay, so that's why it's so important to pay attention to BRICS, because it's not US versus China. It's all these guys versus the US. Okay, so that means in terms of whether this is going to play out, I don't know. Media doesn't really talk about this, but I've done a lot of research. Okay, so this is what I think is very interesting. Okay, and like I said, by about August, September, so as you can see, power shifts here in April to May. By August, September, MBS gets some new friends, and after that, things get interesting. Okay, so then I will just leave it at there for Saudi Arabia. Okay, so I think it's important to realize that the innovation is a lot more interesting than just technology. I think when we think of innovation, you have to think about how people are playing the chess game in very new ways that we didn't used to think of before. And that's why the air era requires you to think outside of the Earth era box. Because notice that the people who used to be very strong, organizations strong in Earth era, a bit tababo already, then what you get here is a new set of organizations that will take power in the air era. So the next thing on my list is not a politician, it's a businessman, and it is Mark Zuckerberg, and the CEO of Meta, Facebook. And the reason why I'm bringing him up, okay, so I need to disclaimer a bit first. Now, the reason why I'm bringing Mark Zuckerberg up is that he hasn't actually had a very good year last year. We all know that the stock price for Facebook fell so strongly that people were like, it was headline news, right? And Mark Zuckerberg is generally not having a very good time in terms of how a lot of his projects are not quite going his way. So even as I do a forecast for him this year, it's quite clear that it's very unlikely that I will give a shining forecast for him. So that one is quite obvious, right? But at the same time, I want to make clear that this is not Zuckerberg bashing, but I think even as I'm showing you what's about to happen, I want to be really clear that the purpose of me putting him on my summit here is not to tell people, oh, like here's how to buy and sell shares. If that's what you're thinking, I think you've missed the point of this earth to air era thing already. But more importantly is to think about how whether a person succeeds or not is going to affect all of us during this air era. Okay, so let's look at Mark Zuckerberg. So big thing for Meta during this period is that there is a new VR headset that is going to be released in 2023. This VR headset is very, very important because it is something that Zuckerberg has been banking his I don't want to use this word, but it's banking his company survival on also, because there's been a lot of things. The stakes are very high for this new release. But having said that, a lot of things are not really working in his favor, because this man here is John Cormack, and John Cormack is known as the virtual reality titan. He's essentially the biggest player, the biggest knowledge person in this realm. So it was a big thing for Meta that John Cormack was part of them, but John Cormack has just left. So as of December last month, John Cormack has left. And my understanding is that John Cormack was quite critical of the way things are being run in Meta. And he was not very confident that Zuckerberg could live up to the promises that he made with the metaverse. So that's not good, right? And that essentially is going to affect everybody's pre-opinion of the VR headset. So quite unfortunately, that there are several indicators that I don't think this is going to work very well for him. First of all, when Pluto is here in the number 5 house, the 5th house is important for creative output. So that means if you have a new product that's supposed to be revolutionary, that will make people excited and like go queue up, like buy iPhone like that, right? And the fact that Pluto is here suggests that it's not going to really go in his favor, and the effect can be quite big. And the fact that it's affecting a planet here in the 2nd house suggests that there could be the result is major, and it's not a positive result. So this happens from about March onwards, and the new product has a bit of a pariah status. It kind of already does, and the expectation of the product isn't like sky high, but just about March onwards, it's going to get a fairly cold reception. And it could involve quite a large sum of money at risk, which means Mr. Mark Zuckerberg will be under a lot of stress around this time from about March to June. To be fair, right, I don't think anyone is like super surprised to hear this, okay? And later on, you'll find that there's a part 2 to this, that by the time we get to the later part of March, then it's possible that he could run into operational issues. So this is either a production issue. So you can see Saturn in the 6th house means that as he starts to produce the product, whether is it the headset or the metaverse, it doesn't matter. Basically, the operations don't run so smooth. And sometimes operations also includes things like licensing. It includes whether are you allowed to sell certain things, and it will hit and it will trigger some existing issues overseas. That means outside of the US, especially with things like publishing or advertising rights. Now, if you look at what's happening in 2022 and before, Zuckerberg has already had some difficulty in general with the law. So that means whether or not you're collecting data, whether or not, like, you know, did you breach our PDPA laws? And Europe is a bit not very happy with him right now. It doesn't specifically say Europe, but I think that the delays could be especially serious in Europe. And of course, this may affect things like revenue stream. Because why? If people think that your product I cannot use in my country, then I buy for what, yeah? Right? So that's why revenue logically will be affected. And there's a part 3 to this. So that means, and on top of that, by about April. And notice that, if I'm not wrong, all these things are happening before the product is actually launched. That's another problem with the air era, is that so much news is being available that before this thing come out, then you find that a lot of talk happens before the product is ready. So and it suggests here that around this time is that the new product is not exciting to the young users. So the nature of such a product is not designed for people in their 60s. Obviously, it's designed for the gamers who are younger, and they are not enthused about it. So it's possible that the product comes across as it's incomplete, it's not fun, and this becomes super strong around May of in a few months' time. So this is a report from Forbes earlier last year, that even Meta's own employees are not very enthused about the metaverse. And it was leaked that basically a memo came out where internally the authorities inside tried to get their own people to, hey, can you all please go and use the metaverse? And it got to that point. So, and among the gamers, I don't know how many of you here are gamers, like say yes if you're a gamer, like you all know what I'm talking about. Like, so the metaverse from Meta is not like really looked forward to right now. Okay, so basically, if you can see, everything is all stacked up between April to June, and that's not a period of time that will be very easy for them. It's quite not nice. Okay, and then on top of that, so you start to see that by the time that they want to talk about launching it, then the value is already somewhat diminished already. So what I see here is that there's a lot of harsh judgment of the company value, and we all know what that means. So that means he's already lost quite a bit of that stock value, and this can affect other things like investments and other Earth era things. Okay, so you'll find that public assessment can be quite polarized. Maybe some people try to be supportive, but it doesn't look very positive for him. So between August to September, which I understand is the original launch date for the VR headset, basically the events leading up to the launch is already not great to begin with. Okay, so that's where you see August, September. And even then, I think a lot of the valuation starts to go a bit funny from about June onwards already. Okay, then, of course, the rescue operation has to go underway because there's a lot of, the stakes are really, really high for this one. So you find that the rescue operation doesn't start this year. In fact, it started last year already. So by February of last year, it became quite clear that they needed to do something to save themselves. So what we saw was a pumping of cash and a lot of other resources to try and keep a product going since February of 2022. But by the time we get to about this year, around this August, September period, which is the original launch thing, I think it's possible that there may need to have some kind of official statement about whether this product will be continued, discontinued, something along those lines. And I also think that it is possible that the product may transition into something else. Maybe it's possible they may say that this product is maybe not so viable. We're going to need some time to sort of like improve it, make it better. But you see, a postponement is also a destabilizing of the value. And it's possible that this could result in employees leaving or like employees get recycled into a different project. Now, I want to be quite clear here is that I don't really have any personal problems with this product. I think it's more of an understanding here that this particular product, why am I focusing on this, is because I have reason to believe that this product can have quite a major impact on what happens with the world during this air era thing. Because even the concept of the metaverse is an important thing in this transition story. So in any case, what I see here is that by September, October here, there's a lot of trying to save the situation. And I also want to qualify that I don't entirely, I can tell you 2023 is not going to be a good year for Mr. Zuckerberg, but what I do see is that it's not a complete gone case. It's like sometimes people need to hit a bit of rock bottom before we can try to find something that is better. And I really hope that based on what I see in the chart, that this is exactly what happens. That means a product may tank, but from learning that lesson is to actually realize, and this thing can be saved if everyone, not just Meta, that everyone actually understands that an innovation can truly work if it is truly air era. That means once this innovation still has a lot of the Earth era thing around it, which is why it doesn't work in this new period of time. So it's you can see this black section here that goes between December to March. And if this realization comes true, it's quite possible that it's still possible to recycle and to rechannel things into a different project. And if that actually happens, then there's a good chance that such a new project could be very powerful indeed. Okay, then I will like, so basically for Mark Zuckerberg, why is it important? It's because if he fails, and if he does, it will be a failure that, if I'm accurate, it will be a failure that will hit the headlines. It will be a failure that will be a massive, massive amount, at least from an Earth era perspective. And what's important here is, why does it affect us? Is because this idea of you want to encourage that innovation, smart people to come and like find the solutions to problems. And I think that there's a possibility that this can have an impact large enough such that the optimism for investing in innovation can be affected. Because the thing is, if something like that can fail very spectacularly, then after that, for every other person who's trying to do an innovative thing, does this affect the optimism in the world? And that's for that reason. I don't know lah. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it's quite possible that you might not want to like make the failure worse than it actually is, because it's actually not good that the world starts to sort of laugh at people who actually are kind of trying to make an effort to do that transition thing. Yeah, that's what I'll say about it. So the thing about innovation is that I know it's a really big buzzword right now, and it's because of the changes happening that everybody is putting a lot of attention on innovation. Now, if everyone looks at your own 2023 plan, it's quite a good chance that it involves a lot of the innovation type, the strategy that's there. So that means you identify what the problems are, and then you try to solve it. It's possible that you try to solve it with technology, or with adopting some of these, try to combine the earth and air elements into it. That's if you are using the innovation strategy, you may want to pay attention to this, which is that actually in the world right now, most of the innovation is quite reactive. So that means the world created a lot of problems in the earth era, like Jakarta sinking, like the fact that some of these, during the pandemic, a lot of businesses were not online, and that meant that they scrambled. So you find that the innovation started to move faster because they're like, oh shit, I think we're not ready for the air era. So the problem is it's reactive, but then, and also you find that a lot of this innovation is like, if the earth era created a lot of like plastic bottles, and we made a lot of plastic things, and then the big buzzword was recycling, right? And some people ask me, oh, then is recycling and this kind of like save the earth sort of thing, is that the new to watch industry in the air era? The problem is that recycling, by and large, doesn't actually work. That very, very few of all these plastics are actually recycled. Some of you have done your research and you know what I say to be the truth. And a lot of this is lobbied by the people who make plastics to kind of convince you that, hey, never mind, can recycle, and so basically you can go ahead and use. So it's even small things like what my research has produced is that if you've ever seen this logo, that means this like recycle logo with the number inside, right? The funny thing is, it actually, the purpose of this logo is to inform what kind of resins are in the plastic, basically what kind of plastic it is. Just because you see this logo on your plastic products does not mean that this product will be recycled. It is that it's a bit designed to be deliberately misleading to sort of take away the guilt from the fact that we are using a lot of plastic. But actually, most of the plastics that you see with this logo, the vast majority, in fact, only about 10% or less of plastics can actually be recycled. And that means most of it just goes into a landfill. And then we just keep producing more and more and more of it. And in fact, I don't know about you, but this is my personal experience that after the COVID period, if I go out to eat, if I go to a hawker center, or if I tapao something that's delivered to my home, quite a lot of times I've realized that even if you eat in, quite often they don't actually give you the kind of cutlery that you actually wash at the end of the day. I get a lot of this kind of cutlery, and it means that much as we air era, we are supposed to sort of cut down on these things. In fact, what I see is that we're using even more of these things, because then people are like doing takeaway, you're doing orders, and it all comes in all these plastic containers. In fact, I would probably guess, I don't have statistics, but I would probably guess that the use of plastics went up like exponentially during the COVID period, and it doesn't seem to have abated at all. So that means in terms of the so-called innovation, I think it's you kind of want to pay attention to like what's real and what's not real, where the real value actually is. And I think another big problem with innovation, one more thing that comes to mind, not on my PowerPoint slide, is this idea of the electric vehicles. So that the whole idea is to use less fossil fuels, and that's good, right? But unfortunately, the EV thing, in the short run, is going to cause even more problems for the world. So that means mining of lithium, mining of other things like nickel and other stuff in order to make batteries. So the batteries and the production of the batteries is quite harmful to the environment. We also get this sense of like, if you were to plug in your car to charge it, but it's to the power grid, right? And the thing is, the power grid is run by fossil fuels, at least for now. So the thing is, it looks good. It looks really good, and it makes people feel less guilty about using up Earth's resources. But at least in the short run, it's really hard to say whether or not it really improves the world. You have to do your own research, yeah? But also, one other big problem with innovation is that quite often it is simply a tech version of the exact same Earth era concepts. So that means they do the exact same thing, and it's really actually not that good. So just now I showed you this thing about the metaverse. And if you look at this picture, I'll give you a hint. This is not the metaverse. This is actually from a game by PlayStation called PlayStation Home. And this game has been around for something like 13, 14 years already. This screenshot is from a game that existed 13, 14 years ago. And if I told you this is metaverse, you might just believe it because it looks quite nice. And this is what metaverse looks like. And so the thing is, 14 years later, there's a sense of like, okay, this was supposed to be an improvement on like the 13, 14 years ago thing. And I don't know about you guys, but as you assess innovation, look at your own plan and start to ask yourself, is there an element of what I call tech washing? So that means it's pretty much the same thing. Then we just tack on a technology to it, right? So apparently, if it has a 3G, 4G, 5G technology means better. It doesn't always mean the case. And I don't know how many of you have actually had this exact same experience of like this Meta and the PlayStation Home thing, where someone shows you a new technology and it's supposed to be cutting edge, right? And when you look at it, there's a part of you that's thinking like, wasn't there a product like a few years ago that was using a supposedly inferior technology, where actually I thought that one was not bad, right? This new one is like, okay lah, got new technology, but I'm not sure it's better. So that means the problem with the innovation that's happening in the world right now is that just because it has a cutting edge thing means agak better, and it's not always the case. And that's something that we really have to look into, because I'm questioning now whether the innovation strategy is always necessarily improving the situation. And if you tick those boxes, then the question is to ask, is that really a good, like, sustainable strategy for your 2023 plan? And so there are also other things where, if you talk about a lot of this money thing that's going on, there's a lot of what I call tech washing of money. Okay, and this part probably will get me some haters, but sort of stick with me. Okay, so that means what you see here is the business model of what is known as in the Earth era, it is known as a pyramid scheme. And usually, and this is stories that I hear about from my grandparents, right, back in the kampung, where it used to be like they had this thing where they recruit a lot of people, that everyone put money into it, and there's no actual product. That everybody puts money into it, and the whole idea is to recruit more people. Go and find more people who will put money into this thing. Then eventually, somehow, like this, there's this great idea about how all this money is going to be distributed and stuff. So a lot of people invested, and there can be a lot of frauds and losses and schemes that used to happen even back in the early days. And then you get less people. At first, people used to get like a lot of benefits. Then after the benefits get less and less and less. Then you find that after that, the top will have the top will start to do funny things to ensure that their value is being protected. And at some point, the money gets accumulated so much that someone disappears in the middle of the night and took all the money with him. And I always thought that this was like an old person kampung story, right? And then when I was younger, I remember that there were a lot of these funny scams where they were called pyramid schemes, and they were made illegal at one point, that you would just recruit all your friends and ask them to like buy something. And the thing is, the more people buy, the more the price go up. Okay, and so the thing is, I think a lot of people know where I'm going with this. And sometimes just because we put a technology on it, and I think that's where people need to get a bit smart, right? Because there's actually nothing wrong with the technology. The technology is fantastic. So that means blockchain, fantastic, right? It's probably a major part of the new world, because that truly is a revolutionary technology. But what I'm specifically talking about is how they took a great technology and they tacked it onto something that has been in human nature for a very long time. And that means it's a very attractive proposition. And a lot of times value gets built because more and more people join. And in fact, what is being bought can sometimes be a bit hard to quantify and a bit hard to say why this thing is worth this much. And I'm making myself possibly open up to haters, but there are a few things like that. And I really think that if your plans involve a lot of tech washing sort of plans, you really want to think through very, very clearly. Because as an astrologer, what I can tell you is that the things that are going to last and the things that will hold us through into the air era are quite often not the things that still have the remnants of the Earth era. There's a reason why the tech companies are great, but a lot of the way they work still have very, very strong Earth era things. Like it's still investors, it's still stock market, it's the stock market was started in Wall Street at the beginning of the Earth era. And even this idea of getting the investor money, the way we do nowadays, is a completely Earth era thing. So when technology answers to the investors, it will always be an Earth era thing. So that means when people ask me, hey May, like what's the best thing to invest in the air era? I said, well, you kind of missed the point of the question in the first place. That means it's not about investing for the ROI in the air era. And that question itself is Earth era. It doesn't matter what you buy. Okay, so there are also other small things like to question whether technology actually improves things. So that means in terms of like fashion, it's easy to like sort of buy stuff and it becomes very cheap, right? Because then everything is online, then no need to pay rent and whatever. So you can buy really nice clothes with good technology. You can make like wow, super nice, and it's super cheap. Like even for someone like me, I can buy a nice top for like $8. And it's one reason why for a lot of girls, their room starts to look like this. And it means that there is also an excess that comes from the innovation. So a lot of times we talk about technology making things cheaper, easily accessible. And again, look at your 2023 plan and how far does that innovation sort of like have that really, really strong Earth era thing that's there, which is the idea we sell more. We sell the consumers more, buy a lot of things, and then just surround yourself. Now you need a bigger house because now you need a walk-in wardrobe to store all these clothes. And of course, then they'll tell you, oh, we recycle, there's sustainability, but here's where all the clothes end up, right? And which means that they all end up, and how many of you know Chinese New Year, right? Basically, you clean out your house and everybody throws out like tons and tons of clothing. So this goes out to some third world country somewhere who is forced to accept all this because they need your money. And then it just sits there forever, just collecting bacteria and crappy thing that make people in the third world countries very, very sick. So, and of course, then there's that guilt portion. And this is where the technology portion, I question this is because we can talk about technology making things cheap and easy, again, Earth era words, but it doesn't improve lives. It is not meaningful and it's not purposeful. And that means a lot of times there's also a lot of lying going on, which is like the big fashion giants. It's like people like ASOS, H&M, Zara. It seems that about 60% of their environmental claims could be classified as either unsubstantiated or misleading. So this is why, in terms of innovation, that's great. But I think the problem why I have put the innovation as almost Earth to air things because the Earth era thing is still there. Okay, and also a lot of innovations have been stopped or blocked by the same constraints of the Earth era. Just now I mentioned that even a lot of the tech companies, in the end, they still have to answer to the investors. They still have to answer for like, is this profitable? And it also means that technology is not always channeled, or all the brains in the world are not always channeled to the projects that actually are helping people. That a lot of times these people are doing the projects that simply make the people who are already rich in the Earth era more rich in the air era. That was the whole point of it. And this is why a lot of I don't know about you guys, but there can be a bit of frustration with the fact that with all the money and all the effort and the years that we put into innovation, there's still that funny feeling that how come we are not moving fast enough? And I can tell you the reason why is because a lot of these innovations are still incredibly stuck in the Earth era. And this is why, as you look into your 2023 plan, then some people will start to look at it and say that maybe you have plans to do like a mobile app thingy. Maybe you have plans to sort of include technology and stuff in it. And it becomes a bit difficult sometimes when, especially if you watch somebody like Mark Zuckerberg's plan fall in 2023, what then does it say for the rest of us who are not multi-billionaires and who are trying to do this tech thing? It's a question that a lot of people want to ask. It's like, we thought this tech thing was going to improve people's lives, but does it still in the end sort of revolve around, can it help people like make more money? Which is exactly the same thing as the Earth era thing, just that you tech wash the thing. So that's a very uncomfortable question that a lot of us will be asking at this point. Okay, so then even technology, to argue whether or not it improves lives. So even things like remote working is a remnant, or is a product of our air era, which is that people don't actually go to an office to work anymore. They're working remotely. But however, it's also it's great and productivity is up. And you find that most people feel that it's easier, costs go down. But you listen to that, costs go down, productivity goes up. Again, the benefits of remote working seem to be a lot more Earth era than it is air era. So that means in terms of being able to sort of like solve problems, and then we create social problems like isolation. Or some people feeling like, oh, I work for this company for like 2 years, but actually I don't know anyone in the company because we have never actually met. So things like that are becoming more and more real. So which means the air stuff, which is social relationships, mental health, those things are down, while the earth things are up, productivity and costs go down. So it's like there's this, now you understand what I mean by, it's like you wanted to say it was good, remote working is good, most people will say it's good, I like it too. But the thing is, like there's that funny feeling that it doesn't feel like this, yes, this is the revolution, this is the future. Like it starts to have that half thing, right? Who knows what I'm talking about, right? So that means innovation has a 50-50 sort of feeling. There's something missing there, right? And also things like spell check. How many people realize that nowadays young people, the spelling cannot make it because then they never hold pencil and write. They never go and write, then after that gonna whacked by the teacher because you spell wrongly, right? Now don't have already, now all typing. And best part, got auto check. So the thing is, that's why people can't spell anymore, they can't write anymore. Okay, and also ChatGPT is the next big one, isn't it? So in case you all don't know what this is, you go check it out. Okay, ChatGPT is amazing, and for everyone who's seen it, and if you've ever seen it in operation, the first thing that everyone says is, okay, I think jobs are gone, right? It's the automatic reaction from anybody who has seen it in action. And that this thing writes better than lots and lots of people I know. It thinks better than lots of people. This headline here is from a CEO who was doing a presentation to a lot of bigwigs and to a lot of leaders. And he was thinking to himself, what can I say to be of value to my audience? So he thought about it and he didn't really have an answer. So he decided to check out ChatGPT. And this is a CEO of a tech company. So he asked ChatGPT, what do you think I should talk about with them? And ChatGPT gave him a list of topics and even a flow of how he was going to present it so that it would be of value to his audience. And you know what? He presented his talk exactly as ChatGPT recommended it. And he said it went really well. And so to him, he's even thinking like, wow, so ChatGPT isn't just going to replace the lady who types the email for you. ChatGPT is AI. It has a brain and it can tell you based on the demographic of your audience, here's what you want to tell them so that it has of value to them. It can replace an executive, a thinking, smart executive. And the thing is, I was just sharing with some people that last time, if you saw a new technology during the Earth era, and then you could say, wow, this thing could be revolutionary in the next 15 years. Like that's what we used to say. And then after that, in the last few years, it became like, wow, I think this could be revolutionary in the next 3 or 4 years. Okay. And nowadays, when you look at ChatGPT, I don't know if you all know what machine learning is. And that means that as ChatGPT gets more hype, it means lots of people, millions of people are going on ChatGPT every day to use it, to ask questions, to whatever. And that thing is learning every second from all the stuff that we are all typing into ChatGPT. And that means you shouldn't be asking what ChatGPT will be in 3 or 4 years' time. You should be asking, what will ChatGPT be like by September? Right? So that means between now and September, that's like 7-8 months, that thing is going to get smarter and smarter by the second, guys. And the thing is, once it gets to September, then ask yourself, what will this be by December? And so the thing is, the speed that this is happening, it's not next year, it's not the year after, guys, it's right now. So the thing here is that the innovation, it's truly innovation when something is such a game changer that it eliminates the Earth era. So the reason why ChatGPT feels different, and when you look at it, you know that you're looking at technology because it does not have a remnant of the Earth era there. There isn't. It's completely conceptual. You put in some words, it crunches the data, it gives you an answer. That's it. And it at no point does ChatGPT actually show any interest whatsoever. People have asked, will you replace our jobs? And it says, no, actually, I won't replace the job. And it's a completely rational answer with no intention to make any of your money at all. In fact, it's open AI. And if I think some people are looking into the code and stuff like that, it's a very open thing. It's unthinkable in the Earth era that you do this. And I remember telling my brother telling me it's like Napster all over again. Remember Napster, where it's just a platform, they build a platform. After that, people contribute to it and people take from it. So, and at no point did people pay for it. Somehow it was just there. And this was what happened between 1981 to 2000 when we were fully in the air era and it wasn't anything about the Earth. And after that, of course, then they say piracy, then you have to pay. So I understand that piracy is bad, but what I'm saying is that that is air era. Everyone contributes, everyone takes. It's a really crazy idea, right? But that's why ChatGPT is going to be the future. I'm not so sure about metaverse, especially if it's like a pay to use or like basically it's Earth era all over again, right? It's a club membership that you have to pay for to join certain organizations. Then yeah, it's also an Earth era thing at some point or another. Okay, so this is basically, yeah, you use ChatGPT, you write love letter, and it's pretty good, right? It writes better than most people I know. Okay, so I'm just going to wrap up here. I know I've overrun by a bit. And so far, I've covered 3 strategies. Okay, and I talked about how invincibility is essentially a remnant from the fire era. That means I'm not even sure why in the Earth era we kept using that, because it was repackaged as economic competition, right? So it worked for a while. Safe zone, it worked in the olden days where there was a mountain that you could lean on. And you knew that if you had a kid right now who was 5 years old, that if you put money into a college fund, that don't worry, by the time he's 18 years old, that we will use this money and he will go to university. Now I'm not so sure. Okay, and the thing is, that's why it starts to question a lot of your plans. Are you still putting a lot of your money into what is known as a college fund for your kid who is now not even in primary school? And why are you so sure that he will go to university? And can I edit that question and ask, why are you so sure that the modern universities will still be around when your kid is that age? So the thing is, a lot of people are feeling the stress right now about money because, hey, I still must put money in this account. There I say, okay, maybe you rethink whether you actually need to do that or not lah. Okay, so realistically and logically, not as a way of trying to be funny, you know. So as in terms of the safe zone, this is the part that upsets a lot of people, because I've done webinars for a long time. And I know a lot of people would much rather prefer that we just stay with the safe zone. But this, if you step back, you realize it's also saying that we were hoping that the Earth era will continue, and it will not. It is over already. And then when we talk about the innovation thing, now innovation is good and it's the best we've got right now. So for most people, that's kind of the strategy that is available to you that could maybe get you through. But then again, if anyone who's listening to this sort of get this feeling that we feel like we're innovating, but we're not 100% there, there's still that feeling of innovation not being able to let go of the octopus tentacles of the Earth era. And that's one of the reasons why it doesn't feel enthusiastic. So that means for a lot of people who are working on some of these projects, it's like if you don't feel that feeling, when you look at your plan, does it feel like, wow, I'm looking at the future? And that is the biggest issue that I have used this summit to explain to everyone, that innovation is good, but it is not the last story. And if I talk so much just to get us to this point, it is that surely I have something else to propose that I think, with all the studies that I've done and all the research I've done about previous air eras, that there potentially is something I could suggest as an alternative that is even better than innovation. And this is something that I will cover in tomorrow's in day 2, tomorrow of the summit, where I will talk about another strategy called agility that allows people to move really, really quickly. And that this, if you realize on my spectrum here, is the air era. And it does not intrinsically have a lot of the pushing thing. And also, I think in the safe zone, we've also mentioned this idea that when people do a lot of things for money, the part that we cannot admit here is that there are things that we do for money. And that means and quite often you see the big thing that's coming up right now is a lot of people saying that their work is not purposeful, it is not impactful. I don't think that it does anything to help society at all. And that's what's upsetting a lot of people. So what if you have the money? Something feels wrong on the inside. And this is why the agility thing is a strategy that I am proposing. I'm no expert in it because I haven't lived through it, but I would like to suggest a few things here. Okay, so that's what's happening tomorrow. But for today, I've basically covered up to 8 countries and I've covered 4 people. And the reason is because I have one more country to cover, no prizes for guessing which country that is, and that will be covered tomorrow in the agility section. And I also have one more very important man that I will talk about. I think the country is obvious, but the person I'm going to be talking about is not so obvious. And I think some people will be surprised to hear this, but there is one man that I think is going to change a lot of the way the world thinks about specific things. And I'll give you a hint, it's not Elon Musk, okay? And so this is what I'm going to cover. And I think at this point, I'm going to get, so my guys, I hope you are ready. Can you all help me post some of the hashtags, okay? Just post it so that people can access it. And I'd like to make a sincere request to my audience, because we've put quite a bit of effort into this. And right now we're only day one. And it's taken me weeks and weeks of research and building these slides just to get this information to you. And not everyone is on this summit, because, you know, there's only so many people I can reach on my own. And it would really, really help me and my team if you would sincerely just give a bit of a shout out, share some of the takeaways. You don't have to spend any money for this at all. We have spent weeks and many, many days of our time just to put this together. And what I'm really asking from you is just a few minutes of your time, just to write down what are some of the real takeaways, simply because for nothing else than the fact that it's so important that people know this. Because today you are here, today and tomorrow you are here to assess your plan. A lot of people have their plans and they have no idea what's coming up. And what this means is that many of these plans by good and hardworking people are going to be disrupted because of things that's outside of their control. And how important it is that not only do they A, know what's going on, and that B, that they actually go and look at their plans and start to make arrangements here. Because they can't control any of these things that we see on my screen here. But the thing is, you can control what you put your effort and your time into to make sure that what you're doing has sustainability and can work in the new era. And I think the other thing is also that, can we all start to sort of introduce elements of agility into your plans? Because otherwise, you're pretty much stuck with an innovation thing that is like, it just goes around in circles, and then we're not going to get anywhere with this. Okay, so now before I end off, I just want to give a quick sneak preview of what we can expect tomorrow. Because as I promised you at the beginning of today's presentation, I already said that when we just do a forecast, it will be only doom and gloom. Now, what's happening tomorrow is that not only is this looking at the agility plan, but what's important is that we are going to assess your 2023 plan with what I call an air era lens. So that means it's going to be quite no bullshit, because it's going to assess, I'm going to show you a few of the most common errors and the most common mistakes that occur in a lot of these plans for 2023 that are intrinsically Earth era, and it won't work. And that's why what then are the shifts that are required to move it closer to an air era philosophy. And that means I'm going to share very specific, 13 specific criteria, 13 specific guidelines that allows your air era projects to not only be relevant, but also to make your life purposeful. And I think that is the biggest problem here with the safe zone and the innovation thing, that people are doing it just purely for survival, just to be good enough, just to keep up so that I don't die halfway. Nobody is enthused, no one is excited. And that means that in order to make this purposeful, and if you think about how when we move from one era to another, is to adopt that mindset of, I can see where this is going, and now I'm excited about what this thing is going to happen. And this is why this agility thing, if you ask me, is way more important than a forecast. I think most people who don't understand what this thing is about, is like they usually come on these events just to know, okay, when is the earthquake going to happen? Like, oh shit, like, okay, then they just sit around waiting for the earthquake to happen. That's not smart. And in fact, the biggest value of it is really to know what to do so that you can be prepared for after the earthquake. And I'm also going to be introducing, and a lot of people will ask things like, okay, so May, you're basically saying that we are all going to lose our jobs, the company's all going to die, then how we're all going to die. It's like, so that's a terrible doom and gloom mindset. And in fact, what I've done, I've given so much thought to these guys that I told you I didn't just study 20, 30 years of data, I studied hundreds of years of data. And I went back into previous eras to see how did people survive this era change. And I've discovered, and I actually wrote them down, that there are 46 timeless industries that will exist, and they will be there no matter what happens, regardless of, I don't care, you fire, earth, water era, it doesn't matter. So that means these industries are quite frankly, they are things that will continue into the new era. And surely, even if you had to make a change, there are 46 of these things, surely at least one is going to fit you, right? So I will share that in quite extreme detail tomorrow so that people can start thinking about when you sit down with your collaborators, then can you move your projects and your plans much closer to these timeless industries? Now, on top of that, we're also going to talk about collaborations. A lot of people have brought your team members with you. And it's the question of how can you then work together And especially if the old structures of companies and legal documents cause no more lawyers, right? So if there are no more legal documents, if there are no more like government laws and things like that, then how then do we get these collaborations going? What does it look like in the air era? Because we know what it looks like in the earth era, and things will change a bit. Okay, and I'll show you some examples of how these models can work tomorrow. Okay, so I'm going to end my presentation here today, and I will see you guys tomorrow morning. And guys, if you have team members, people that you work with, who you know that you want to build air era projects with them in the upcoming years, please ask them to come tomorrow, because it really, really helps. Guys, it's very hard to explain this agility thing. And it's hard to tell people, and maybe you have changed your mindset, but it's hard to convince other people to change their mindset too. And since I'm doing tomorrow's session for free, you might as well ask your team members to come. It will be much easier when everyone can see, okay, this is what it's going to look like. Okay, guys? So thank you very much for your attention today. I will end off here. I will see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.